Salutations, ladies and doom. Welcome to Podcast The Storm, where socially awkward outcasts, crazy weirdos, and all around nerds convene to talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the Nerdy Occultist, aka the Authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Hello, everybody.
And
It's a good thing that we basically overbooked last week because basically nothing of substance happened this week, pretty much because of the whole debate, like filling up the entire news cycle thing.
right. Yeah, and I'm your host last time. We want to be the brainstormer pop culture. How's everyone doing tonight?
I'm doing all right.
All right. So this technically isn't on the list. I just remembered that a Jonah Arts had sent this to us on Discord because it was something prevalent that happened this week, I believe.
Mm.
That being the passing of James Earl Jones.
Mm-hmm.
For those who don't know who James Earl Jones is, he is a revered actor, mostly voice work, I believe. He did do a lot of live action stuff as well.
First of all, if you don't know who James Earl Jones is at this point, shame on you.
Mm-hmm. James Earl Jones, the revered actor who voiced Star Wars villain Darth Vader, starred in Field of Dreams and many other films and Broadway shows, is an EGOT winner, died this morning. Also, he was the voice of Mufasa in the original Lion King movies.
He also was the voice in the new one, but it was very obvious that it had been 30 or 40 years since he voiced this character in the new
one. Yeah, died this morning on September 9th, 2024, at his home in Dutchess County, New York. He was 93. While I am not... it's going to sound it's going to sound wrong, and I do apologize for that. But obviously what I mean is, given the age, I am not entirely surprised, and I do hope he at least passed very peacefully.
Yeah, like, it's obvious to everyone that I think we both would have rather he lived for another 20 years, but 93 is what is colloquially referred to as a full life, definitely. So
yeah, and given...
hopefully he died as peacefully as one could die, because if not, then that sucks.
Yeah. His rep said independent artist group confirmed the news to Deadline. Widely regarded as among the world's great stage and screen actors, Jones is one of the few entertainers that have won an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony through his Academy Award, though his Academy Award was honorary. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, the man has done plenty to immortalize himself in the annals of like film history. So
mhm.
I don't particularly give a shit that his award was honorary. Not that Oscars or Academy Awards particularly mean anything anymore because of stupid artistic woo lately, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. Jones has received 2 Primetime Emmy Awards, a Daytime Emmy, a Spoken Word Grammy Award in 1977, and 3 Tony Awards. The actor amassed nearly 200 screen credits during his brilliant 60-year career. Oh, and he was in Coming to America. He was the father of Eddie Murphy's character. I've never really sat down and watched that movie in its fullest, to be fair.
No, me either. I've never sat down and watched it either.
I feel bad now, given.
Well, like the article said, the man had more than 200 roles over the course of his life, so you can't really feel bad for not getting to everything.
Right. Starting some early 60s TV guest roles in Stanley Kubrick's 1964 classic Doctor Strangelove or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. I've never seen that movie. I've
I
heard it
didn't know he
referenced.
was in. I didn't know he was in that. I've only seen clips of that, but
Huh?
I didn't know he was in that.
Well, he would have been really young, actually, considering.
Well, yeah, but still, like, I didn't know he was in that. Good for him.
He probably is best known for his voice role as the dastardly Darth Vader in George Lucas's original Star Wars trilogy, Star Wars 1997, The Empire Strikes Back 1980, and Return of the Jedi 1983. He also reprised the villainous role in Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith 2005, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story 2016, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker 2019, and TV's Obi-Wan Kenobi and Star Wars Rebels.
It's kind of sad that that is the last like authentically James Earl Jones voice role as Darth Vader, because Kenobi was kind of shit.
I think the confrontation between him and Vader at the end of the show was pretty good.
Even though it probably shouldn't have happened for another like 30 years timeline wise, but okay. But I'm not saying he was bad in it. I'm just saying that it kind of makes me sad that that was his last voice role as Darth Vader.
It was before. It was another decade. I think it takes 10 years. No, 10 or so years
right,
after.
because Luke and Leia were like little kids in the Kenobi show.
Well, he aged a lot in just like 10 years then, considering.
Well, I mean, Tatooine is a desert planet, and deserts do dehydrate a motherfucker.
Okay. Moving on, or
it's one of those things of like, I really wish that there was at least one more good role that he could appear in. Apparently, Disney did get his permission to use AI to replicate his voice, so obviously we're gonna get more Darth Vader at some point, but it is meaningful that is the last organically James Earl Jones Darth Vader performance.
All right, moving on.
Yeah.
Movie fans will remember such chilling and motivated quotes as, "When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master. I find your lack of faith disturbing." And of course, no, I am your father.
Well, yeah, duh. Again, he has in my brain, James Earl Jones is similar to Morgan Freeman in that he had one of the coolest voices to ever exist on film. And by the way, the absence of James Earl Jones now makes protecting Morgan Freeman all the more poignant and necessary. So somebody just like spirit away Morgan Freeman to a life-sustaining bunker, please, because when we lose Morgan Freeman, I might actually cry a little bit. Like I would gladly see a world in which Morgan Freeman lived until I literally die. But that's neither here nor there.
Right. Okay. Also among Jones's best loved roles is Terrence Mann, the reclusive 1960s author who reluctantly teams with Kevin Costner's Ray Kinsella to unlock the latter's visions of baseball lore in Field of Dreams, 1989.
I've heard a lot of Field of Dreams, and I've seen a bunch of clips of Field of Dreams, but I've never actually sat down and watch it.
Yeah,
In my
so
defense, in my defense, though, it is kind of a sports movie, and I don't really do that so
it's got
much.
Ghost.
This is also true.
So, all right, based on the 1982 novel Shoeless Joe, the film from writer-director Phil Eldon Robinson tugged, no yanked, at heartstrings with its sweet nostalgia, high concept plot, father-son dynamics, and general excellence. It earned 3 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. It lost to Driving Miss Daisy, a film whose Broadway adaptation starred Jones as Hoke Colburn, the character played by Morgan Freeman on the big screen. Huh. Didn't know that.
Speaking of Morgan Freeman, it's a small world after all.
Yeah. Jones also voiced the Lion King's Mufasa in both the 1994 animated pick and 2019 hybrid remake. It was just pure CGI. People, can we just admit that?
Like, there's a lot to hate about the Lion King remake, and among the many things that it makes me hate is if you actually listen to James Earl Jones' voice work on Mufasa in the remake, the man sounds almost heartbroken and tired that he's having to do this again 30 years later. It like I could literally feel his pain from the recording booth in that performance. I might be alone in that, but it really felt like some part of him died when he had to re-record Mufasa. Anyway, moving forward. Yeah.
Among his dozens of other films are The Bingo Long Traveling All-Stars and Motor Kings, 1976, A Piece of Action, 1977, Conan the Barbarian, 1982. Yeah, I think he was the main antagonist, actually.
Yeah.
For that one. Soul Man, 1984, Come to America, 1988, The Hunt for Red October, 1990, Patriot Games, 1992, Sneakers, 1992, The Sandlot, 1993. I actually just watched a clip of that today where I saw him.
Speaking of Conan the Barbarian and long gone but never forgotten voice talent, the narrator in the Conan movies originally was Mako. He of Uncle Iroh fame and Aku fame for everyone in our generation.
Clear Present Danger from 1994, Judge Dredd 1995, Gang Related 1997, and Come to America 2, which was in 2021.
Yes, I did know they made a sequel. I did not know they brought members of the original cast back. Good for them for doing so.
He also lent his sonorous voice to the famous This Is CN promo campaign for the cable news network and reoccurring as the narrator on Third Rock from the Sun. He also appeared on The Simpsons 3 times.
Again, one of the most iconic voices in all of cinema, right up there with Lawrence Fishburne and Morgan Freeman. Though, if you put a gun to my head, I would say Morgan Freeman tops them all. But again, you would have to literally put a gun to my head to make me choose between those 3.
All right. Among his scores of TV are guest roles on such classics such as The Big Bang Theory. I remember that one. House.
Yes, I remember that one too. It was one of the it was in the later seasons, which is unfortunate because the writing really went downhill after like season 3. But it was a very cute inclusion of him, and I liked seeing a more positive side to him because, well, usually when he's involved, he's either very, very dramatic or very, very villainous because, well, iconic voice. But in this instance of that particular Big Bang episode, he was actually allowed to show his love of the fans, which will always be a good thing
Right.
moving forward.
Okay. 2.5 Men, Homicide, Live from the Street, Frasier, Touched by an Angel, Lois and Clark, The New Avengers of Superman, Picket Fences, Law and Order. I actually saw those episodes with him in it.
Okay, question.
He was a lawyer.
What episode was he? What episode was he in of Frasier? And 2, I forget what the other one I was going to ask about is. Oh yeah, Lois and Clark. Who did he play in Lois and Clark?
Yeah.
Because I know Howie Mandel played Mixius Pitlink in like 3 different episodes of that show. I didn't know that. James Earl Jones was involved in Lois and Clark. I gotta get that on DVD at some point. That and Smallville. If you put a gun to my head, I would say I like Smallville better, but both of those are at least interesting. And I mean, Terry Hatcher, she wasn't the greatest Lois Lane, but she will always have a soft spot in my heart because she played Susan on Desperate Housewives, and that's where I first met her as an actress.
Okay.
Mm.
Franklin Stern. Owner of the Daily Planet. Yeah, he's
Oh, well, that's a good role for James Earl Jones.
yeah, he was just an original character for the show.
I was gonna say I was almost leaning in a Perry White direction, but
oh wait, no, he was created by someone in the comics. And mine.
Okay, good. Anyway, moving right along.
Yeah. On Order, Sesame Street, Highway to Heaven, NYPD Blue, Daytime Soaps, Guiding Light, and As the World Turns, and miniseries Roots, The Next Generation, and Jesus of Nazareth.
I didn't realize just quite how prolific he was. I shouldn't be surprised though, because again, he's one of those people where if he asks to be in your project and you say no, someone should beat you vigorously about the head. Moving on.
All right. He was nominated for a lead actor Oscar for his role in The Great White Hope, 1971, and was given an honorary Oscar at the 2012 ceremony. An 8-time Emmy nominee, his 2 wins both came in 1991. Lead actor in drama series for Gabriel's Fire and supporting actor in a miniseries or special for Heatwave.
Sorry.
That's a whole different thing. What were you going to ask?
Who was the host of the Oscars the year he got his? I want to say 2012 was Seth MacFarlane, but I might be thinking of 2013's.
Hold on.
Because I kind of wish it had been Seth MacFarlane, because Seth MacFarlane is a giant nerd, and I think he would have loved to be there when James Earl Jones finally got his Oscar.
Billy Crystal.
Oh, okay. So I'm guessing I was thinking of the 2013 one. I must have been, because I know that sometime around that time Seth MacFarlane did host the Oscars. I think it was 2013 though, because I vaguely remember rooting for her to win Oscars, and it only managed to win a couple because people are Philistines. I swear to fucking God.
Yeah, you're right. 2013.
Okay, good for me. I am no longer temporally confused.
Right. Born on January 17th, 1931, in Arkabutla, MS. Where's MS?
I believe that's Missouri, but it could be mistaken. It might be Minnesota.
Hold on. Mississippi.
Okay, so I was wrong on both counts. There are a lot of states, folks. I can't remember them all.
There's only 50. Jones was a 2002 Kennedy Center honoree and received Lifetime Achievement Awards from SAG-AFTRA in 2009 and by the National Board of Review in 1995. A commanding presence on the Broadway stage, Jones earned 4 competitive Tony Award nominations for Best Actor in Play, winning twice for his performances as Jack Jefferson in The Great White Hope in 1969 and as Troy Maxson in August Wilson's Fences in 1987. I've actually seen some clips of that.
See, this is the thing I'm learning in this article, because I didn't realize he was such a big Broadway actor, but I mean, good for him.
Yeah.
As if we needed any more reasons to think of James Earl Jones as awesome.
He received a special Tony Award at 2017 ceremony, Great White Hope, in which he played a lightly fictionalized version of heavyweight champion Jack Johnson, was Jones' breakthrough role. He also starred in the 1970 film adaptation, his first leading role on the big screen. Oh.
Good for him. Again, I didn't realize he was this big into Broadway, but bravo, sir.
He appeared in nearly 2 dozen Broadway shows, from his first starring role in Sunrise at Campobello, 1958, and most recently in The Gin Game, 2017. Along the way, he starred in productions of stage classics such as The Iceman Cometh, 1974, Othello, 1982, On Golden Pond, 2005, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, 2008, and You Can't Take It With You, 2014.
I genuinely want to know who he played in Othello, because that's cool.
Oh, that's interesting. In September 2022, the Sherbert organization rechristened its 110-year-old Court Theater as the James Earl Jones Theater, with a dedication ceremony attended by Samuel L. Jackson, Latanya Richardson Jackson, Brian Stokes Mitchell, Norm Lewis, and New York City Mayor Eric Adams.
I didn't realize that James Earl Jones and Samuel L. Jackson were friends. That is awesome. I mean, it probably shouldn't surprise me, given how much Samuel L. Jackson is also a nerd.
To be fair, I feel like there are a lot of weird friendships a lot of like celebrity friendships you would be surprised by. I mean, Eminem and Elton John, like really good friends.
Okay, is Elton John still alive?
I think so.
Because if those two are still alive, I want to like grab a beer with one of them, like both of them, at some point, because those two together would make for some very interesting stories, I'm betting.
There was actually a story Elton John said, kind of defending because people were calling Eminem homophobic at one point. That he sent like for like as a marriage gift, because Elton John got married, right? Elton John got married.
Yeah.
Sent Elton John and his husband to, I believe it was in I'm not sure if it was diamond, but jewel encrusted cock rings.
I mean, it's probably a little bit more burlesque than I would have gone, but it is Eminem, and of course he fucking did.
Oh please, I'm not gonna lie, man. That honestly seems like a joke I'd do.
Uh, but honestly, given how like semi-edgy Eminem's sense of humor is, I don't know why I would be surprised.
Elton
Just
John loved it.
well, yeah, duh. Like I, I mean, if I ever get married, please don't do that to me. But if they were diamond encrusted and I knew Eminem well enough to get the joke, I probably would find it. I probably would find it sweet in Eminem's weird gangstery sort of way.
Anyway, moving on. Jones did not attend the dedication ceremony, but had been given a private tour of the facility, where he'd made his Broadway debut in 1958, the week prior.
Well, I'm sorry he was busy or too busy to come, but hey, he got a theater named after him, and it was the same theater where he made his debut.
Yeah,
So
here's the quote. He says, "For me, standing in this very building 64 years ago at the start of my Broadway career, it would have been inconceivable that my name would be on the building today," Jones said in a statement at the time. "Let my journey from then to now be an inspiration for all aspiring actors."
I mean, this folks is why we get so pissed off at modern day actors. This right here is precisely why there was just simply a better class of actor back in the day. It's not just that social media makes everyone's private thoughts well known to everyone else. It's that genuinely back in the day there were some seriously classy motherfuckers in the purview of Hollywood. The Orson Welleses, the Vincent Prices, and yes, the James Earl Joneses of the world set a fucking higher standard than modern day Hollywood is capable of living up to. And they should be motherfucking ashamed. So if you've learned anything tonight, make note of how classy this motherfucker is. Because that is the level of class and dignity that all actors should be aspiring to instead of the position of political activist every time they open their fucking mouths. And we're running out of the remaining classy motherfuckers. Again, everyone protect Morgan Freeman as if your lives depend on it. Because the day that man kicks it off, I might actually weep. Okay, moving on though to speaking of being very, very pissy about modern day actors being shitbags.
Yeah, the first one's the Forbes article.
Mm-hmm.
All right, give me a sec. All right, there we go. So yeah, this was originally from Forbes.com. It's written by Paul Tassi. I'm sorry about that. I'm tired, a little tired. I had my eyes dilated yesterday, and I'm still somewhat. Well, I don't know if the headache is still correlating from that or not.
Mm.
It's published August 27th, 2024. New details emerge about why The Acolyte was canceled.
If you're going to cite something other than it was shit and obviously a terrible execution of an otherwise half decent idea, then I'm not sure you fully understand why the thing was canceled. Because
You know what?
I for one, and most people who watched the damn thing can tell you why it was canceled. Namely, it was shit, and so many people hated it that almost no one actually watched it or enjoyed it.
So, I'm thinking about something we could do on stream a little later, maybe if we're in the second article regarding the Acolyte.
Mm.
Why don't we try to rewrite it?
I mean, we're probably gonna have to open up a slot on Thursday then if we're actually going to devote ourselves to rewriting the thing.
Well, no, I'm just talking maybe like just general brainstorming session here on stream, so everyone is entertained by this.
I mean we could, but the acolyte
Again, Don, you know what my motto is when it comes to ideas.
right. Good idea. You can make a thing about anything. It just has to be properly executed.
Well, no,
I know the rule, but frankly, speaking as the only one of the two of us that have actually seen the thing, there is at least as much wrong with the Acolyte as there was with season 1 of Legend of Korra, and you know how long we have now spent two different consecutive drafting periods fixing that that nonsense.
Fair enough. But I mean, I think the simple fix would be obviously replace the what are the witches called again?
The Cult of the Thread. That's not really what they're like. No one ever actually calls them that. That's just what I refer to them as because it's their only like memorable trait is that they view the Force as like the threads of destiny or whatever the fuck. And that idea sounds much cooler than it actually is in the show because you would think that someone who viewed the Force as a means of manipulating the threads of destiny, you would think that that would be fucking badass. But alas, no.
So it honestly kind of makes it sound like, you know what? Actually, let's read this article a little bit, and then we'll start getting into that because I have some ideas are starting to come to mind.
Mm-hmm.
But my initial reaction was make it the Dathomirian witch, because if it's set like 100 years before, like Phantom Menace, right?
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be like an era of peace, relatively. Then we get to see the Night Sisters, one, obviously in live action for the first time, and two, at a different, because we kind of see them in the.
Unfortunately, it's not their first time because Ahsoka ruined them so bad.
Oh, okay. Anyway,
but I'm fine with them being their own unique kind of Force user, a Force witch. It's fine. I don't need them to be Night Sisters, and I don't think it would necessarily fix the problem even if they did, because we already know, at least loosely, thanks to Dave Filoni and Clone Wars, how the Dathomirian magic system works. Granted, they completely forgot that when they were doing Ahsoka, but that's neither here nor there. I'm fine with there being another kind of like witch cult. It's just that base concept, that basic summary I gave of they view the Force as not a force, but as a like web of fate. That is a much cooler concept that I have just summarized than anything they actually do with the concept of the thread. Because they do it only in the most superficial of terms. The only unique thing about the Cult of the Thread, as far as I can tell, isn't even that unique because it's been done better in so many other things. The main thing that seems to be relatively unique about them is, as per the chant that has become a meme because it was so badly declined, they bind each other's like Force essences together, and therefore similar to like the coven binding in the show The Secret Circle, or similar to the True Knot in Stephen King's Doctor Sleep, they essentially bind each other's life forces together, and therefore they can channel like their entire coven's worth of energy through their high priestesses, which is a really cool concept, even though, like I say, it has been used in other places and used much better in other places. But it would have been an interesting idea to make that a thing in the Star Wars universe. It's just one, they don't set that up, so when they use it, it comes right the fuck out of nowhere, and I have to lore spackle it back into place by referencing those other things I just mentioned. And two, it literally only becomes relevant the moment that they all die, because obviously if you kill the person who's drawing on their power while they're while they're drawing on it, you can essentially kill all of them at once. Kind of similar to the way it
Right,
happened when.
Dalton.
Sorry. Like I say, I go into like magic things, and I've watched a lot of like fantasy media, so I know how this works. The other reference I was going to make was the scene in Supernatural when Rowena's coven channels their power through her when she's fighting Amara. That's the other reference I was going to make. Anyway, moving on.
Disney may not be publicly commenting on why the Acolyte was canceled, but we have internal information all the same, it seems. All this Acolyte info is coming from insider Jeff Snyder, who previously had a bit about how Keanu Reeves at one point almost played Soul, something that doesn't really fit with Leslie Headland saying she wanted Lee Jung-jae from the start.
I mean, it probably would have been the best thing about the show, regardless of what happened, because
yeah, I can't. I've always seen people fan cast Keanu Reeves as like Darth Revan or Revan.
Yeah, that's not a bad choice. Honestly, if I had my druthers, he would have been the cast for the Ancient One. And I'm not saying anything bad about Tilda Swinton thereby. I'm just saying that one, considering that one of Scott Derrickson's original like inspirations for the first Doctor Strange movie was The Matrix, it would have been an interesting passing of the torch. And two, Keanu Reeves is old enough now that he could convincingly play the Ancient One without it being much of an issue. And it also would have been more attuned to the character as he was actually written in the original story, instead of pandering to China by refusing to acknowledge that Tibet is a thing. Moving on.
Right. Okay. Now we have further information on the cancellation of the show from him, though I'm not entirely sure a lot of this couldn't be deduced from existing information. The highlights are it was canceled due to low viewership. This is likely to push back against the idea that this was done to placate toxic fans who review bombed the show and made an industry out of videos complaining about it.
If you want to sell everyone on this review bombing concept, you're gonna have to make a show that is so indisputably good that only morons would review bomb it. It's not that hard. Like, despite the fact that I'm at least ostensibly on people like Nerdrotic or Mauler or the Little Platoon's side with a lot of this stuff, I did, for example, disagree heavily with Gary on the issue of Multiverse of Madness. Because for all the faults that the inexperience of Michael Waldron gave that movie, there was a lot in that movie to recommend it. And a lot of Gary's criticisms of Multiverse of Madness was literally the result of him either forgetting necessary information that was already set up, or just not paying attention to the movie he was allegedly watching. And for those who want that full story, there are 2 back-to-back episodes on this channel where we spend, like, I want to say, like, 4 or 5 hours, 2 hours in each case, going through Gary's review of Multiverse of Madness and calling him out for either just not paying attention to already set up information, or literally not paying attention to the movie he was allegedly watching. Moving on.
Right. Viewership dove after episode 2. I can also fully believe that this is what a lot of third-party data suggested, and also the first few episodes of The Acolyte were not very good. Yes, plenty will say the whole show is bad, but as someone who really did like it by the end, the key phrase there is by the end. If viewers quit early, they never made it to the all-timer episode Night, with its wild lightsaber fight and shocking deaths. I've seen the clips of that, and
it's really not as impressive as everyone thinks, because there are some people in that fight scene who are literally waving their lightsaber at nothing for no explicable reason in universe. And moreover, as a counterpoint to what this person just said, Grace fucking Randolph was trying her damnedest to be on the Acolyte side as much as she possibly could for its entire run, and even she rage quit essentially at the last episode, or gave up on the thing at the last episode. So when even one of the most stereotypical quote unquote normie shills as Grace Randolph can't support you anymore, then you fucked up. This is exactly what I was saying earlier about, if you really want this review bombing idea to work, you have to actually make something so good that its quality can't be disputed, which Multiverse of Madness, in my opinion at least, got close to, Michael Waldron's inexperience notwithstanding. And that's why I spent 4 or 5 hours arguing with Gary about it on this channel. But you literally do have to do that level of quality at the very minimum in order for there to be disagreement between people like Gary and people like me. Because as much as I find a lot of the black pill ideology annoying, you can't really argue with things like the Acolyte or Velma or the Marvels or even the first Captain Marvel and so on, because it is so self-evidently bullshit that even people like Grace eventually come to terms with just how broken everything is. So if you want there to be an argument as to whether review bombing is a thing, make something that can only be crapped on if people are review bombing it. That is how you prove your case. Incidentally, you can't prove your case because this idea of review bombing only exists because you can't come to terms with the fact that you deliberately go out of your way to piss off your fan base, and then you get mad at the fans when they inevitably become pissed off with you. Which is the only context in which something like that can work. Imagine if you go to a restaurant and you order something off the menu, and they end up reheating something in the microwave and serving it to you, a la like Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares. If someone was annoyed at that, no one would think it was odd. But apparently, people think it's odd that the pre-established fan base for a given IP actually desire to hold content in that IP to the standard of that IP, i.e., the thing that made them fans in the first place. It's really not that complicated. If you want fans to like you, you actually have to give a fuck about the kinds of things that they give a fuck about, or at least pretend to convincingly enough that it gets at least some of them on board. Moving on.
All right. Well, okay. I think last sentence I should have read that first, before I think that would have won people over, but most left after 2 episodes if they showed up at all.
And again, counterpoint to that, Grace Randolph did her damnedest to try and defend the thing for its entire run, and in the very last episode, she even gave up on it. And she's about as, like, normie entertainment establishment media as you possibly can get. Which, by the way, doesn't weaken her nerd credentials, at least not most of the time, because she is actually a nerd about some stuff. It's just whenever she has to fake being a nerd about things she isn't actually a nerd about, like the Super Mario movie, she immediately opens her mouth and inserts her foot. But you don't need me to tell you that. Grace's oblivious pseudo-intellectualism about things she doesn't know about is well known on the internet. To the point that the aforementioned set like Mueller and Mr. H and Gary have a favorite game of what kind of dumb shit did Grace say this week, which is probably justified. Moving on.
Right. Okay. It costs $630,000 for every minute of screen time. Given that the Acolyte was estimated to have a $180 million budget before this, and 80 episodes are about 40 minutes long on average, it would actually push it closer to 200 million. Maybe deduct a bit if some of those minutes are opening or closing credits, but yeah, probably right around that 180 million.
So here's
Uh,
the
hold on,
problem.
hold on. There's
Sorry.
more. There's more. Sorry.
Okay, go
Above
ahead.
all else, this was the reason it died. It's unclear how the show, wholly disconnected from the Skywalkers and that entire era, was supposed to hit viewership metrics to justify a budget like that. Andor reportedly cost 250 million and was not not well watched, but it had a second season because that was negotiated up front. No such luck for the Acolyte, but this is very much a Disney spending problem, not a show problem, as we've seen this time and again with their movie and film projects. This is also a studio reportedly paying Robert Downey Jr. alone $100 million to wear a mask as Doctor Doom, after all.
Oh, for the love of fuck. It's not the money you spend that is the issue. It's where the money goes. You morons. The issue with The Acolyte wasn't simply that it cost $200 million. It's that money apparently went somewhere that was almost never on screen. It's the same problem with Rings of Power. Even though the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies came out 20 some odd years ago, and basically, like, for all the world, solidified what Tolkien in live action looks like. Rings of Power looks like it came out 20 years before the Peter Jackson movies did, and on a budget of maybe $1 million per episode, when in actuality it was almost 10 times that amount for the entire show. So we must ask the question, if so much money goes into something, where should that money go? And my universal answer has always been, the first and foremost place you need to put your money is on the screen in general and in the money shots in particular. If your CGI looks like something out of early Hercules Legendary Journeys or Buffy the Vampire Slayer from 20 years ago, you have fucked up. Because, and here's another one of my favorite bugbears that always ends up coming up. Back in my day, and yes, I realize I'm old as shit now, but stick with me for a second. Back in my day, shows didn't have fuck you money to throw at every single thing they wanted to throw money at. Do you know how they compensated for this lack of money? Through the creative and stylistic use of this thing called stylization. In particular, I would draw your attention to a show from when I was a kid called Legend of the Seeker that was an adaptation of Terry Goodkind's Sword of Truth novels. Every episode in that show was made for just under or just over $1 million. And yet, I literally still own the DVD for Legend of the Seeker Season 1 because, despite the fact that it was made for like a tenth of what The Acolyte was made for, or a tenth, or maybe even 100th of what Rings of Power was made for, it has a interesting and worthwhile enough aesthetic and thorough and interesting enough CGI that it doesn't look cheap. It looks more full than it actually is. It looks more well-rounded than it actually is, because it wasn't just the amount of money you put into something, it is very much how you use it and what you use it for. And if you put all that money somewhere other than on screen or towards proper stylization, or if you don't have the creative talent to properly stylize something to cover the holes in the production, that is a you problem. That is not a money problem. Put the money where the money should go, into on the screen in general and towards stylization to cover your holes in particular, and you will do just fine. That's why Netflix, at least some of the time, especially when assisted by people like Mike Flanagan, can make most of the things they make for roughly a tenth of what it costs to make The Acolyte, or what it costs to make Rings of Power, because the people they hire, Mike Flanagan in particular, is very good at constructively creating a stylized aesthetic that is pleasing to the eye and feels full to the audience when they're looking at it. Unlike The Acolyte and Rings of Power, which look cheap and empty as shit. They look like discount Ren Fair bullshit most of the time. If they even ascend to that far, usually it looks like bad cosplay most of the time. Moving on.
They're not plans to remove the show from Disney Plus. Fans were starting to freak out that The Acolyte was not only canceled, but Disney might willow the show, remove it from the service altogether. It's reportedly not happening. This would not have been a tax write-off like we've seen from Max with things like the Batgirl movie. But because the show is already released, one main reason would to avoid paying residuals on it indefinitely, but there are no plans to do that, so trust that as much as you will. I'm not really shocked at anything here. I have said that while extremely irritating, the Acolyte Haters Club did not get the show canceled. It was always cost versus viewership. But with that But with that higher cost and a concept that was never going to drive anything like the viewership it needed, all of this is squarely on Disney.
No. Bad pseudo-intellectual twat. No. If you had made something of quality by actually putting that money towards something that would have been compelling, interesting, intriguing, and properly stylized, such that the average viewer would want to watch it, you could have been successful. Do not lay your own incompetence at the feet of your price tag, because it's not about how much money you use, it's how much bang you get for your buck, so to speak, and most importantly, where do you actually put the money? Because the issue, again, is that Rings of Power and or The Acolyte look as though they were made on a TV budget 20 or 30 years ago, back when Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Hercules the Legendary Journeys were still contemporary. But the reason that is because whoever you got behind the camera or whoever you got in the writing staff could not fill in the gaps of the CGI or the aesthetic with anything that makes people want to look at it or want to watch it or want to engage with it. That's why, for example, like I was just saying, a relatively cheap show like Legend of the Seeker still holds up pretty damn well aesthetically because they didn't rely on pure expense to sell the concept. One of the mistakes that The Acolyte and Rings of Power do make is they think that telling the audience how expensive something is should make them want to watch it, instead of whether that resulting show is any good or not, or is visually or conceptually interesting or not. And in both cases, the answer is no. Despite the fact that Peter Jackson's movies came out 20 some odd years ago, they look like the more contemporary project, and Rings of Power looks like the thing that came out 20 years ago. The same thing happened with Matrix 4. It looks the worst out of all of the Matrix movie, and yes, that does include the Animatrix, because the actual effort put into the Matrix trilogy was such that even though the technical parameters weren't quite as advanced as they are today, the people using those technical parameters that were existent 20 years ago actually put the effort and prioritized putting the money towards the right places. And so the aesthetic of the Matrix movies still largely holds up, while the aesthetics of the fourth Matrix movie didn't even hold up when they were released. Same is true of Rings of Power and The Acolyte. Put the money where it should go, into proper aesthetics and proper stylization, and also, by the way, probably the writers too, and you will get good results. But put that money towards things that the audience cannot see or isn't going to give a fuck about, even if they can see it, and you will always fail no matter how advanced your technology gets. I'm looking at you, James Cameron. Just because Avatar is the visual effects technology showcase doesn't mean anything about those movies is memorable, likable, or interesting. You can't just jangle the technological CGI technology keys and expect everyone to just zombifiedly, be hypnotized. Moving on.
Right. And while I've said it's not impossible Disney changes its mind, I think this info is leaking to show why they're not going to.
And by the way, one of the supporting pieces of evidence this motherfucker used was Andor. And I wanna highlight a crucial difference between the Acolyte and Andor, just to make this point stick home even further. Do you think they would have gone ahead with Andor season 2 if Andor's fan reaction wasn't a very positive one? Because my guess is they would have just bought the people who were under contract out of their contract. If Andor's reputation was even close to the Acolyte, they would have just tried to shove it under the bus. The difference between Andor and the Acolyte is both had relatively small viewer figures, but Andor has a cult classic or cult fandom status because those that did watch it were so in awe of it that they recommended it to a bunch of other people, and so the overall opinion of Andor went up over time, such that people didn't watch it in its original run, but their viewer numbers increased over time. You can't do that with something like The Acolyte because there is very little to no quality in The Acolyte to make people have a cult perception of it. Whereas Andor, for all of its occasionally stupid moments, and yes, I'm not the biggest fan of Andor, for all of that, at least had an audience that was willing to balance out its lack of viewer numbers with interest and motivation.
I think also it was just a lot more engaging than the Acolyte, right? Because there was like a
Yeah, I wasn't the biggest fan of Andor, but I can totally see why a bunch of people were, because it leans into, and this probably also helps. Andor leans into the spaghetti western vibes of Star Wars.
I
The
thought it was like
Acolyte,
a political spy thriller.
little bit of both. But my point is, it feels more at home in the universe it's making use of than the Acolyte ever will, because the Acolyte went out of its way to subvert the universe in which it is taking place as much as possible. And when you are trying to sell someone on a pre-established IP, and they are organic fans of that pre-established IP, to then turn around and say, this IP is bullshit, let's burn it down, like Rian Johnson did, is always going to backfire on you. That's why I'm kind of amused and amazed that they're still going ahead with a Rey movie or a Rey trilogy in 2025. Because honestly, my thought process it'll probably end up somewhere in the general vicinity of Solo at best, and possibly even lower than Solo. It might wind up somewhere in the vicinity of the Marvels. And if it turns out that in 2 years the Rey movie comes out and it does perform closer to the Marvels than even Solo, hear me now, quote me later. Because that's just how obvious this shit is at this point. Moving on.
All right. This is definitely from BountyInTheComics.com. Star Wars stands blame cancellation of The Acolyte on everything but ratings. I'm really tired of sharing the franchise I love with toxic, misogynistic, immature racists. It's posted August 22nd, 2024, and written by someone named Nerdigans Incorporated.
Mm. For the record, that could just as easily be said about the people that are saying it as it can about the people they're saying it about. Because most of social justice, whether they want to admit it or not, has racial biases. And their approach to art does trivialize art to such a frankly retarded degree that it does come off as very immature and very primitive. This whole art can never be valued as a end in itself, but only ever as a socio-political or moral means to an end shit is in fact very much a childish and hipstery approach to art. If you either never had or got deprogrammed out of your ability to enjoy things for their own sake sincerely, then you don't realize it, but you actually are the immature ones in this approach to art. Moving on.
Right. So directing their anger towards the actual reasons behind the series' failure, namely Kathleen Kennedy, Leslie. I'm going to say more again. We've had this conversation before. Like it, given the first interview,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Given the first interview we had read from Leslie Headland, it seems more Kathleen Kennedy kind of imposed certain things that made Leslie head towards more what we got with the Acolyte instead of her original idea.
Yeah, because it seems, based on the interview that we read of hers, that she actually did show up with the intention of prioritizing the fandom over the ideology, and then Darth Kennedy is the incompetent over there, called her into her office and insisted that she put as much of herself, quote unquote, into the show as possible by mimicking a play that Leslie had previously made rather than giving a shit about Star Wars as an IP. So a large percentage of this might have been avoided if Leslie had just told Kathleen to kick rocks instead of listening to her. Which, I mean, granted, would have probably gotten her fired, but this is essentially the choice you have to make in the modern world. Are you going to side with the old guard film press and the art house establishment, or are you actually going to give a shit about the IP and thereby make yourself a persona non grata in said establishment, a la Henry Cavill? Because that is the thing that most people hate about Henry Cavill, is he is such a organic nerd that he actually gives a shit about things like lore, characterization, three-dimensional world building, and the in-universe logic of the IP, rather than themes, didacticism, and authorial intent derp. Moving on.
Right. Okay. Instead of name the Kathleen Kennedy, Leslie Headland, or literally anyone else involved in its production, devastated current era Star Wars fans are blaming Disney's decision to cancel Acolyte on such concepts as racism and misogyny. On August 19th, a month following the series season finale, Deadline's Nellie Andreeva reportedly learned from her insider sources that after just one season, the House of Mouses had made the call to axe the Acolyte. Despite absolutely abysmal viewership numbers representing a terrible return on Disney's $180 million production budget investment, grieving stands have taken to claiming that the decision to cancel the widely planned series was actually the result of the company choosing to cater to a supposed legion of Star Wars fans who could not handle a story not centered around white males. Oh my god.
Again, how many non-white, non-males have there been since Star Wars was, like, incepted? Lando, Leia, Jocasta Nu,
Chewie,
hmm?
Chewbacca.
I'm not sure.
The
Not
non
by social justice logic.
still cool
'Cause
though. So I'm
well, yeah, but my point is that they want to claim, oh, so many people mad that the story isn't focusing on a like non-white, non-male, and yet there are so many examples of non-white, non-males in Star Wars. And that's before you even get into the question that I think you were leaning to, which is there are non-human characters full stop in Star Wars. Why the fuck are you obsessed with human diversity? And the reason
actually wait, hold on. Uh non-white, non-male. Uh I had one, but fuck, I had it, but
honestly, in my head, this doesn't need to go any further than Leia. Like Leia was the in New Hope, Leia was
badass.
the sassy one. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the I think the scene that everyone remembers from the
Someone
first
has to
time they
save our
watched it.
skins.
Yeah, the someone has to save our skins scene. You know, Han and Luke are basically standing there arguing with their metaphorical thumbs up their ass, and Leia just takes the blaster and fucking shoots the vent. That honestly doesn't need to go any further than Leia. But if it needs to go further than Leia, we can go through basically every era of Star Wars you like, and there are significant non-white, non-male characters. Not to mention all the people that are non-white but male, and the people that are white but not male, etc. And again, it doesn't operate by social justice rules, because in social justice land, all the non-human characters are just metaphors for whichever identity they feel like adapting it to, which I think is stupid. But yeah, that's not even getting into all the straight up non-human or non-humanoid characters, of which there are plenty. But whatever the fuck. Moving on.
All right. It wasn't about the numbers. They just showed how incredibly racist and sexist they actually are. And unless they do something immediately to rectify this mess, we're never getting any new Star Wars fans ever again.
Bitch, please. Mother Talzin is my favorite expanded universe character. Full motherfucking stop. And I am the guy who constantly brings up things like magic and or Sith sorcery in the Star Wars universe. I love when magic is brought into literally any motherfucking setting, and the idea of an entire planet of witches is perfectly within my purview of weirdness. I am the magic guy, and I love Mother Talzin as a character. She is arguably like the third most powerful being in the Star Wars universe at the time of the Clone Wars, because she's in the general same power bracket as Sidious or Yoda. She just does different shit because her focus is on what would broadly be termed quote unquote Sith sorcery or magic in general, rather than the Force in its strictest, most secular terms. So don't sit here and tell me that I don't like female characters in the Star Wars universe, or I don't want explorations of femininity through witchcraft and shit. Which, small point, stop using witchcraft as a feminist metaphor, please, for the love of all the gods, because it fucking irritates me when they do that. The political weaponization of my field of study pisses me off. But even if you want to leave the political aspect of it alone, don't sit here and tell me that I am not the easiest sell in the world for basically any universe's version of magic, as long as some level of thought goes into it. And so I would probably be the most sympathetic to the idea of the like witch cult of the thread there. The reason I don't like the witch cult of the thread, or don't like the way the actual Night Sisters of Dathomir were used in Ahsoka, for example, is because they were done shittily. And as a fan of those things, I would like to see them properly and qualitatively presented, instead of removing literally all the cool factor from the Night Sisters in Ahsoka and basically making a complete non sequitur out of the philosophy of the Cult of the Thread. And like I got done, like I summarized to Brainstormer, the general like premise of the idea of a group of Force witches who view the Force not as a force but as a like weaving of a web of the like threads of fate, and like bind each other together, similar to the True Knot or the Coven from the Secret Circle, or Rowena in that aforementioned one episode of Supernatural where her coven channeled all their powers through her. Like that is a, as I just got done listing, a very well trodden fantasy trope you could have used. And I probably would have been fine if you had set up that was how the power of many, quote unquote, actually operated before, it became relevant to the plot. Because that's the big issue. The issue isn't that them binding each other's force essences together is a dumb idea, because it isn't. Again, look at all these other places where a similar concept has worked well. The issue is that despite talking about the power of many every 5 fucking minutes to the point that it becomes a meme, they never actually explain how the Cult of the Thread is functionally or like epistemologically different from how every other Force user uses it. I can explain to you how the Night Sisters magic system is different from other Force users, because for all of the many faults of Dave Filoni, he at least pilfered some ideas from people who actually knew what they were doing and actually did both visually and operatively and epistemologically explain what is different about the magic that relies upon the magical ichor of Dathomir, which, by the way, should be native to Dathomir, but isn't because Ahsoka is dumb. But they went into what makes them different, and what's more, they abided by the rule of cool in such a way that not only can you see very clearly that this looks and acts differently than other Force abilities, but actually like those Force abilities because they are cool. The Cult of the Thread never even begins to explain what the fuck they're doing until it becomes relevant to the plot, or ever rises to the level of cool. They in fact abide by the opposite rule, the rule of cringe. They only do things when it's the maximum amount of terrible, basically. Moving on.
Okay. At Darth Molly claimed it wasn't racism; it was the ratings. Is a weak argument because the loudest haters were the racist, misogynist, encouraging people to trash the show. But whatever.
No, there are no such people with major platforms. If you mean people like Gary from Neurotic or Little Platoon or Mahler, they may be wrong and occasionally kind of dumb, and I do occasionally very vehemently disagree with the people I refer to as the black pills, which I believe is a phrasing I'm borrowing from Anglintine a little bit. Although I think I might have inspired that phrasing in the first place. But anyway, but as much as I occasionally do disagree with the black-pilled anti-social justice set when they knee-jerk react negatively to every fucking thing under the sun and don't actually pay attention to the thing they're supposed to be watching, one, that doesn't usually happen with Little Platoon, because Little Platoon goes over everything with a fine-tooth comb, and that's why his videos tend to be 3 or 4 bastarding hours long, and so much the better for it. But two, those people are not motivated by sexism or racism. Because again, those very same people will defend people like Leia in the original trilogy or Lando in the original trilogy, which would be a fucking strange thing for racists and sexists to do. And in all honesty, that's why it's hard for an actual racist or sexist, like, say, Richard Spencer, to get into these kind of nerdy hobbies in the first place. Because nerdy hobbies are the ideal place to go if you are quote unquote marginalized, because every nerd was at one point an outcast. And as a result, we wind up in a situation where we are very, very inclusive in the way that that's supposed to mean. The issue is that nerds are also focused on things like knowledge, skill, and merit in relation to the various IPs they like, and that makes them the enemy of social justice because they don't think that knowledge, skill, or meritocracy should be meaningful concepts, and they don't like the idea that you actually should have like metal testing, teasing of each other, or that you should actually value people who are more knowledgeable on a given topic than people who are more filthy casuals, so to speak. Moving on.
Right. Okay. Interestingly, the show, well, with probably the most POC representation, is the first to get axed. At Rose1_Marie1 noted, may the Space Witches put a hex on Bob Iger and the toxic racists that review bomb the show.
Oh my dear,
Hi, can I? Sorry, I got something to say. Hi, Rose. Brainstorm pop culture here. Mexican mutt mix a lot of different things of me. I didn't care for the show mainly because all the promotional stuff I had seen of it, it just did not grab me. It looked very boring, very kind of underwhelming, and just it didn't look good. I had nothing to do with characters being like characters' race or gender or whatever.
And here's my little fun intro. As previously mentioned, I am the easiest sell in the world for any IP introducing magic into its setting, pretty much, as long as they bother to put in any kind of effort. The reason, or at least a large part of the reason, why I am such an easy sell for magic in various different IP is because I have been a practicing polytheistic occultist for 18 bastarding years and some change. And yeah, you don't want to appropriate my lingo here, darling. It will not go well for you. Although incidentally, considering that most of the social justice obsessed twats who are inclined to agree with you are also extremely ill-informed fluffy bunny Wiccans, you might not like the consequences of that if you do try to put a hex on people you don't like, because one, your spell work is sloppy and makes me ashamed to be a practitioner most of the time, and two, you and yours, meaning said fluffy bunny Wiccans, operate by the rule of three, which isn't a universal thing in Magic, but is definitely a thing if you operate under that parameter. And if you operate under the parameter of the rule of three, and then you try to do some kind of baneful, harmful magic, it's gonna come back to bite you in the ass. As I'm sure a bunch of the Fluffy Bunny Wiccans are learning years after they put several concordant hexes on Donald Trump, and now it is biting them in the fucking ass. Funny how that works. Moving on.
Okay, canceling the Acolyte because of the racist and sexist dude bros of the Star Wars fandom couldn't shut their fucking mouths is just pathetic. At Mars Ivy Grows exclaimed, "Screw you, Disney! I am so FR. FR.
I have no idea.
Hold on, I'm looking it up.
I assume maybe a short version of frustrated, but I don't know why that would be the initialism for frustrated.
Hold on. For real.
That doesn't, like, even the sentiment of being for real is not a proper ending of that sentence. Unless they mean the fucking part is for real. I guess that might be what they mean. But like, even like from a sentiment perspective, that is a very clunky sentence. Even
Yeah, people on
taking
Twitter,
into
I
account
doubt
the Urban
these.
Dictionary shit.
Dude, I doubt these people on Twitter ever really care about vocabulary or proper grammar.
Right, I know, and I'm not shitting on someone for using, Urban Dictionary level slang, but if you're gonna use Urban Dictionary level slang, could we at least agree that it probably should make sense in context? Is that so much to ask that if we use slang and Urban Dictionary stuff that it actually like makes sense in the usage of it? Maybe this is me being an old fucker again. Wah, 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 wah. Moving on.
Okay. At Wishinless tweeted, the Acolyte getting canceled is actually so evil. Everything about it was so cool and so Star Wars. No, it wasn't. Telling a story from an era there isn't really any visual media about. And because a bunch of racist bigots couldn't bear to watch someone not white for a couple hours, it's over. Motherfucker. Okay.
Lando Cal motherfucking Rizbian is my answer to that question.
Also, Star Wars Rebels. I know it's not. It's very like kiddie. Well, it's sort of not really. It's not as great as Clone Wars, obviously, but I mean, it's hard to really top that. Especially with certain constrictions, I believe the show had.
Mm-hmm.
But the main character, Ezra Bridger, to my knowledge, wasn't white, given the style he looked like, and also Kanan Jarrus, the Jedi, who was also supposed to be like a cowboy samurai style.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't white either. So, and they were pretty cool characters. So
yeah. This is the problem. They're trying to treat Star Wars, which came out in the 70s as a result of George Lucas's fanboyism for Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung. They're trying to treat a movie that came out in the late 70s, a franchise that came out in the late 70s, as if it came out in like the 1930s. And that's not the case. Like, there is no discriminatory hiring practices in the Star Wars movies because it came out in the late 70s and was done by a young college kid at the time. Like the reason why George Lucas was such a fanboy of Joseph Campbell and by extension Carl Jung was because several of his college professors who he learned basic film stuff from were fans of those things. And I believe George Lucas might have actually personally known Joseph Campbell, but I could be mistaken on that. Point being, by the late 70s, Hollywood had well and truly started on the integration train. And people like Billy D. Williams, who played Lando Calrissian, and Carrie Fisher, who played Leia, were definitely given a bunch of major sympathetic qualities to their character. So I don't know what the fuck you expect to be playing at. If this had been a franchise that was born in like the 1930s, where like integration was still a thing and stuff, you might have had a point, But in this instance, you don't even have that because this came out in 1978, and by then things had been fucking well and truly on the road to integration. Doesn't mean it was perfect back then, but it definitely does mean that Star Wars doesn't have the same kind of baggage that something like Buck Rogers um Flash Gordon might have had on some kind of paper, sort of. Moving on.
Right. Okay. At Guerrera de Galaxia expressed, I'm really tired of sharing the franchise I love with toxic, misogynistic, immature, racist, and constantly seeing them be catered to, even though the rest of us have been here all along, wanting new and fresh stories that connect deeply with all of us. Okay, we all know that's a fucking lie.
Yeah, well, first of all, I doubt that her fandom credentials in general, because hipsters be hipsters. But
Mm.
even taking that as read, I'm just gonna take that paragraph and play the Uno reverse card with it, because you guys are the ones who make race a central axis of discussion when it is not an issue. You guys are the ones who think women have been oppressed throughout all history and therefore have no agency and need to be coddled and protected and shown as quote unquote strong because otherwise the world won't believe they're strong. You guys are the ones who have a childish utilitarian model of art whereby art is only ever valuable as a socio-political or moral or thematic or like didactic means to an end, and don't understand the notion of valuing things for their own sake or for in-universe logic or characterization reasons. You guys are the ones who trivialize world building as if it's an entirely non-issue. You like you guys are the ones who are probably the most guilty of all of the alleged moral failings that you claim everyone else is, specifically because you presume that women are still in the same position they were in the 1890s. Black people are still in the position they were in either during the Civil War or during the 1950s. You guys are the ones who presume that no like gay representation or no like gay activism has ever been done and that we're still back in like the 80s or some shit. You guys are the ones who assume that the modern world is just as befucked as the world 100 years ago would have maybe been. And you guys are the ones who assume that no minority voices can speak for themselves as individuals and have to be a source, a like vessel for the platonic hive mind of the academic conception of these identities. If you ask me, that is far closer to a meaningful definition of sexism, racism, and prejudice than anything I've heard from like the Gary from Nerdrotic or um, Mr. H or Little Platoon or Mahler or any of those guys. Now, again, do I think they sometimes over like knee jerk in reaction to some things? Do I think they sometimes don't pay attention to the shit they're watching? Do I think sometimes they go in wanting to hate something just because they want to hate it? Sure, but that doesn't mean it has anything to do with racism or sexism. They could just be being dumb, or they could be so sick of dealing with all this woke nonsense they sometimes flinch even when all someone is doing is reaching for the salt, so to speak. You know that old saying of like, if you've been repeatedly beaten the fuck out of, you might start flinching even when people try to give you a handshake. That is a far more like solid and three-dimensional explanation of why the black pills on our ostensible side are sometimes wrong than they're just racist, sexist, subhuman monsters. And by the way, speaking of things that are a moral detriment to you people, you guys are the ones who assume that the world is filled to the brim with Nazis and fascists and basically every other kind of subhuman deviant you care to name. And all that does is make that idea more legitimate in your minds. The idea that there are Nazis and fascists and like commissars all over the fucking place waiting to conspire against you is a profoundly miserable, profoundly cynical, and profoundly bitter thing to project onto your fellow man. There are not Nazis or fascists hiding under every rock. There haven't been for almost 80 years now. You guys need to grow up out of this. Either you believe everything I believe or you're a subhuman monster attitude. It is childish, it is bitter, it is miserable, and it is dangerous. And all you're doing with it is hurting yourself by presuming that everyone around you must secretly be hiding the devil in them. Or some shit.
Moving on, or
Yes. Also, hello, Melissa. Apparently, one of our newest subscribers, and she's from Massachusetts. I've always wanted to make it up there at some point because I really think I would have fun in New England, but haven't done it yet. I'm from PA for anyone that doesn't already know. But yes, hello from Pennsylvania from me, and Indiana from Brainstormer.
it's Melinda, not Melissa.
Oh, sorry, I misread that. But yes, hello, welcome. We hope you enjoy the channel. There is a lot of back content because we've been doing this show for 5 years, give or take. And it would be more visible if it weren't for the fact that YouTube stupidly changed live streams from a subcategory of video to their own category now. But yeah, if you want to see some of what we've been doing for the last 5 years, go to the live tab. There's a shit ton of backlog.
I've also made a playlist.
Yeah, so that is also an option if you'd like to get caught up on our content. You're under no obligation to, obviously, but if you like this kind of content, there are probably hundreds of hours of content there because we do about 4 hours worth of geek news roundup stuff basically every week. And we used to do it 2 or 3 times a week back when Google Hangouts was the main streaming platform. We don't do that anymore because StreamYard restricts your hours unless you pay more, and we don't have any mechanism to pay more. Anyway, moving right along.
Yeah. At Kleptocrat World went as far as to bizarrely blame Star Wars creator George Lucas for the entire affair, claiming if he had given women other than Princess Leia more than 63 seconds of speaking time in the original trilogy, Lucasfilms wouldn't be held hostage by the worst racist incel parts of the fandom. The Acolyte deserved better. What the fuck are you talking about?
Again, no. Again, there is an entire planet of witches in the broader universe of Star Wars. Not to mention Joe Costanu, who was the librarian of the Jedi Order. Not to mention Asajj.
Hey, pointing out, Princess Leia spoke more than 63 seconds in the original trilogy.
Yeah, I think that's her. I think that's her way of getting around it, because if she actually included Leia in the female character category, she would realize that how stupid she was being. So she said that women other than Leia had 63 seconds of screen time, which just goes to show you how much she has to ignore Leia and her existence, because if she brought in Leia and her existence as admissible to the discussion, she would realize how fucked her assumptions are, because, well, again, Leia was the sassy one. She was the one who, while Han and Luke sat around arguing about what to do next as they were being shot at, just picked up the blaster and shot the vent. It's really, really, really not hard to find good female characters in the Star Wars franchise. Again, my favorite expanded universe character, i.e., not in the movies, is Mother Talzin. So you're gonna have to miss me with all of this racism and sexism bullshit. All you're doing is conflating the ideology of feminism with the presence of all women. And just because you're a woman doesn't make you a feminist. One is an ideology, the other is a class of human being, or a type of human being. They're not the same thing. And trying to use one as a human shield for the other is remarkably disingenuous and shitty of you to do. Moving on.
Though they acknowledged Star Wars. Star Wars has been directionless and derivative for a while. Aladalans declared that canceling Acolyte just reaffirms that the franchise will keep catering to racist and sexist dude bros at the expense of creativity. No, motherfucker. You know who they're catering to that at the expense of creativity? Motherfuckers like you. Because you don't have creativity. You bitch at creativity because you think it's all this like hateful
Yeah,
bullshit.
you think creativity is immoral because you think
Yeah.
meritocracy is immoral, and you think art should only be valuable as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. You're the people who say that the only purpose of art is socio-political moralizing, or my themes, or my authorial intent, or my didacticism, etc., ad nauseum. You are the people who picked up the baton from neo-Hegelians like Antonio Gramsci or institutions like the Frankfurt School and see art therefore as only a means to an end. It is the fans that you apparently hate who care about things like in-universe logic, characters as three-dimensional simulacra of human beings and therefore worthy of being cared about. Things like lore and world building, things like character motivations in universe, etc., and so on. It is the people that you hate, the allegedly toxic fans, who prioritize art not as a means to an end, but as an end in itself, and care about characters not as some kind of political statement or symbol of what the author thinks, but as like full-fledged beings in their own right. Because while fictional characters and fictional settings might not be like real in the empirical sense, they are meant to be meaningful simulacras of reality. And by the way, in a multiverse, like if you take multiverse theory into account, what the fuck does fiction even mean anymore? I.e., if we go by the many worlds interpretation, where literally anything that can be imagined can also exist somewhere out there in the universe, then the standard of fictionality or non-empiricism start start to break down entirely, because if the multiverse exists, then every fictional IP or concept that's ever existed does exist out there somewhere. At which point, there's even more reason to care about characters as entities in their own right, and care about worlds as like realms in their own right, and to pay as little attention as possible to themes and authorial intent, because those things have always been at best secondary, and hyperfixating on them like the Frankfurt School types do, or even like the Jungian types sometimes do, looking at you, Professor Geek, is at best like secondary, and at worst like tertiary to whether people can actually enjoy a piece of media or not, or to enjoy a piece of art or not. Moving on. Unless Brainstormer stepped away from the...
Sorry, I muted myself because I didn't want to make noise while you were talking. So sorry, I literally just started reading. I didn't realize I still had myself muted. So
Yeah, someday we will get all the kinks worked out, folks. It won't be today, though.
to this end, some angry fans went so far as to predict that the Acolyte's cancellation will in turn lead to nothing but more unoriginal and possibly AI-generated Star Wars productions. Okay, now we can go back to more Baby Yodas, random white dudes in mask, and more AI deepfake Luke Skywalker. Deep win to Star Wars. Big win for Star Wars. To Star Wars.
Actually, it is.
Hold on. I white dude and is he talking about Pedro Pascal? Because that motherfucker isn't white.
He's Hispanic, hence the Pascal part, but and probably also the Pedro part. But yeah,
I mean, yeah, he grew up in Texas, but I mean,
yeah, he's of
so
Mesoamerican extraction,
right? But that is telling.
Yeah, basically anyone can be quote unquote internalized white as and when they disagree with us or are inconvenient for our narrative because derp. Yeah, but by the way, here's the very ironic thing. Because your approach to art from a philosophical standpoint is so absolutely backward, the idea that in-universe logic doesn't matter, characterization doesn't matter, world building doesn't matter, lore doesn't matter, etc. And the only thing that matters is socio-political and moral themes, derp. Because that is your guys' approach to art, literally AI can and does regularly make art more interesting and meritocratic than you. Because the thing with AI is AI can't really create in the strictest sense, but what it can do is copy and learn from all the different pieces of art that are worked into its database. And so while AI is probably never going to entirely, by itself be able to produce a masterpiece, what it can do is replicate things which are middling and adequate. And the thing with being, bare minimum middling and adequate is middling and adequate is still better than bad. And because of the backwards nature of modern day art school bullshit, you literally will intentionally make things bad on purpose just to prove that quote unquote meritocracy is a harmful, childish, dangerous delusion that we must get rid of. And the more you do that, the more you deliberately create spiteful bullshit like Velma, the Marvels, She-Hulk, the Acolyte, and Rings of Power, the more you demonstrate that you and your approach to art is actually fundamentally wrong. The more you try to do away with and do without meritocracy, the more you prove that it is necessary and that it definitely does exist. Because people are very, very starkly aware of the absence of it when you make something deliberately devoid of it. Because higher ideological and moral reasoning, derp. When you prioritize the socio-political morality of a piece of art over its quality, you get what you pay for. I.e., if you try to make something that is morally or socio-politically pure more than you do something that's actually good, you will get something that is morally and philosophically pure over something that is qualitative. And given that people are drawn to things by their qualities, the more you do that, the more you demonstrate how necessary it is to focus on the quality of the art over the messaging and themes of the art. Derp. Moving on.
Right. Okay. At Planet Jarman warned the way Star Wars is going to be nothing but deep fake AI characters and a cooling green puppet for the next 20 years because a bunch of 40-year-old because a bunch of 40-year-old YouTubers thought there was too many women in this show is absolutely crazy. Just shut the fuck up.
It's not women. It's feminism.
Dude,
and
there were plenty of women YouTubers that we know and have watched that are not the biggest fan of both the Acolyte and how Star Wars is gone.
Yeah, Nerd Wonder, that Star Wars girl. What's the redhead's name? The one with the like writing crop in all her intros.
I don't know who you're talking about. I don't think I've seen her videos.
I can't think of her name, but Amanda the Jedi, Altiori, like the list, she goes on for quite a long time. If I were to sit here and think of all of the female YouTubers or YouTube personalities who fucking hate this kind of like political weaponization of art bullshit. And this is once again the thing. Even feminism, for all of feminism's faults, is usually only used as window dressing for this neo-Hegelian or post-Frankfurt School ideology, this approach to art as a means to an end rather than an end in itself bullshit. This literal, like, socio-political and moral weaponization of art thing. And it, granted, there are at least a few cases where, like, the Jungian approach, the more, like, traditionalist version of this can be good. Star Wars probably being the example. Even the Jungian approach backfires if you treat it like it is the only way to make good art, or use it as the only mechanism to understand art. Like, you can make good stories and good art by using the Jungian archetypes as a template, but if they become your only tool in your utility belt, so to speak, eventually you're just going to run out of fumes. In the exact same way that the, like, Antonio Gramscian approach that these people do will inevitably backfire. Except, at least the Jungian approach usually, and I stress the usually part, because there are plenty of cases where, for example, people like the Fourth Age or people like Professor Geek literally can't see the quality tree, like, they can't see the quality forest for the Jungian trees. Probably the most quintessential example of that is when Professor Geek said that Joker 2019 was a bad movie because it embodied the trickster archetype too much, and there's too much of that kind of representation in the society or something. And, like, me and everyone else who loved that movie just went, okay, but there's so many good things about that movie, though, and it works on so many multiple levels, no matter which ideological perspective you're coming at it from. So to say that a piece of art is bad because the trickster archetype is too represented is exactly the same level of stupid as this piece of art is bad because it emboldens quote unquote toxic fandom. It's just the like partisan inversion of that, basically. Anyway, but yeah, usually even the Jungian approach will make some allowance for quality, except when people get too obsessed with it or it becomes their only mechanism to understand art, at which point you wind up in the Professor Geek decrying the Joker movie situation that I just alluded to. But both of these, both the Jungian approach and the, like, Frankfurt School approach, are terrible, not to mention ahistorical ways of viewing art. And they always will, like, quality or talent notwithstanding, end up backfiring eventually. The only correct answer, as far as I can tell, is you need to treat art like it's an end in itself. You need to treat worlds that you create in said art like they matter. And you need to treat the characters like they are the three-dimensional simulacra of human beings that they are supposed to be. Doesn't mean you have to say, like, that they empirically exist, but they do have to be, like, logically consistent and actually behave as a being with some level of quote unquote agency would behave in certain circumstances. And the more stupid contrivances, or because the plot says so, you have to add in
Dalton.
between there and there, the more you will fail.
Dalton.
Yeah, moving on.
Uh, All right. Likewise, at Cosmic Esper lamented, direction Star Wars is going now is in the next 20 years, all Star Wars will be on the big screen is a CGI AI necromancy clusterfuck, all because some misogynistic, racist 40-year-old incels couldn't let it grow past the Clone Wars or the blight that is the Skywalker name. Oh my, okay, this motherfucker doesn't know jack shit about Star Wars, really.
Right, but again, as before I get sidetracked off into the weeds again, because these people are so frustrating that I actually have to explain why they annoy me every single fucking time. Before I get off in the weeds, before I get off in the weeds again, though, the thing I started with in the most recent rant was, you guys do realize that you guys are actually less preferable to the AI. The same thing happened during the writer's strike in like 2020 and 2021. You guys don't seem to understand the fact that your level of vindictive spite against the very concept of sincerity or the very concept of fandom makes AI actually preferable to you. For all that, people are afraid of AI because Skynet syndrome, and there is at least some arguments to be made there. For all that people are frustrated or annoyed with AI or fear AI like co-opting the human ability to be creative and stuff, you guys are so bitter and vindictive that you actually make the AI seem preferable by comparison. Because at least the AI usually winds up somewhere in the vicinity of like average banal content, which is still better than bad content. And what's more, the AI does what you actually tell it to do, to some degree at least, and doesn't hate or spite its user when they use it. Whereas these writers, the kind that flipped shit during the writer's strike and believe in all this post Frankfurt School Gramscian bullshit, is like these kind of people are actually less preferable than the AI, because the AI doesn't spite the people who use it or the people who view the AI's content. They only do what they're programmed to do. You people are frankly just as programmed by the modern day art school mentality, and you actively can spite the people who disagree with you or call you out for being shit at your job. And here's the thing. Again, with the AI, at least we get middling average content instead of overtly bad content. So, one, you're more shit at your jobs than the AI typically is. Two, the AI can actually be reasoned with if you tell it to like narrow its field or like make changes to its original rough draft, they'll actually do it. And three, at least the AI doesn't hate my guts, whereas you people very obviously think you have a moral cross to bear every time you get a hold of another IP and deliberately try to spite its fan base as much as possible to show how quote unquote meritocracy is a harmful childish delusion. Moving on.
Right, okay. Da, 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 da. So now we're moving on from Star Wars. Actually, okay. Since I did mention that I wanted to at least briefly discuss an idea of how to make the Cult of the Thread and try a little bit to rewrite the Acolyte.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for one thing, I think the Cult of the Thread. Okay, to keep in line with lore, nix the whole Sith thing.
Yeah, because one of the major problems I had with the Acolyte, especially in the latter episodes, once pseudo Ezra Miller there showed up and started alluding to the fact that he was a Sith and having apparently the raw force power to force push away like an entire crowd of Jedi Masters and their Padawans, I kept waiting for either Darth Plagueis or, more likely, given the timeline, Darth Tenebris, his master. I kept waiting for him to show up and do the "you have become a rival" speech that Palpatine did in Clone Wars when Maul and Savage Opress became powerful enough to be considered rivals. I kept waiting for that to happen, and the thing that kills me is Darth Plagueis was actually in the last episode of The Acolyte, but he at no point called pseudo Ezra Miller out on being a rival, even though he had demonstrated quite a lot of force power in that vein. And two, when Darth Plagueis showed up in the last episode of The Acolyte, he was already old. Even though if we're going with the idea that Acolyte takes place about 100 years before the events of the Phantom Menace, Plagueis should be in his teens, I think, timeline-wise. And like I say, more than likely, his master Darth Tenebris should still be alive. We're following the actual canon.
Right. So what I was going to suggest was, obviously, again, cut out the whole Sith thing.
Honestly, just for badassery points, I would leave it in and actually have Darth Tenebris show up and do the "you have become a rival" thing from Clone Wars, because that would have been cool. Because that way you can still have Darth Ezra Miller still doing his thing. It's just actually properly framed within the canon now. So Darth Tenebris shows up and bitch slaps him into next week for it.
So my idea would be Code of the Thread are kind of the main antagonists. With them believing the... How did you say it again?
Instead of the Force being a force, the Force is more like a web that is like woven with the threads of fate.
Okay. Well, for one thing, major inspiration would be like the Bene Gesserit.
That would be a good choice. I would throw in the I would keep the them being bound and having the power of many thing.
Right.
I would just actually use that concept, and I would actually, explain how the thread is philosophically different from the Force. My main inspirations would be the Coven from the show The Secret Circle, and or the True Knot from Stephen King's Doctor Sleep, which got an excellent fucking movie adaptation in 2019, by the way. I personally think it's better than The Shining, but that's because, in my opinion, there was way too much Stanley Kubrick in The Shining and not nearly enough Stephen King in The Shining.
Also, the idea to me is like, if they're supposed to see threads of fate and supposed to be like manipulating the future for their own ends, right? That's what it's supposed to be.
Well, not necessarily the future. Like they use the thread similar to the way that Guinan was shown using her powers as a listener in Star Trek in like Picard season 2 or season 3. In that they can still like move objects and stuff, but they do it by pulling on threads within the cosmic web, so to speak.
All right.
Which I think you. Sorry, go ahead.
Either way, I think making them like not members of the whole, like political advisors and stuff, trying to manipulate things to fit their ends of things, their own agendas and stuff like that, would be interesting.
Yeah, that is a good idea.
Because okay, if this is supposed to be taking place 100 years before Phantom Menace, Republic is relatively in an era of peace.
Yeah, it's stable and prosperous, and as yet, nothing has really gone wrong. This is around the time when things start going wrong for them, I think.
Right. So, the Jedi are effectively... Well, they're supposed to be keepers of the peace. They're not generals here. not soldiers, they're
Monks.
monks and kind of court wizards a little bit.
They're space wizards essentially.
Well, I meant like, like the
Yeah,
purpose.
in the like court magician advisor type role. Yeah, I know
Yeah.
what you mean.
So it would be interesting, oddly enough, like if we're doing, because most of the time Star Wars takes inspiration from a lot of different genres and fits it all in there.
And a lot of real world history too,
Yeah.
particularly like the fall of the Roman Empire in the case of the prequels.
Mm-hmm. Here, I'm trying to think of like an older, like kind of political drama, because honestly, this could kind of be more staged as like, I could see less like action and more like really
Intrigue.
gripping, intrigue, like scenes where it's mostly dialogue and like words, like a chess match via words.
Sort of a cross between like the old Spartacus show from HBO and Game of Thrones a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't want to go Game of Thrones just because like that is relatively modern still.
Right. But that's I mean in terms of the like courtly politics and political backbiting kind of stuff
Yeah.
was what I was going with there.
But yeah, just I'm not saying that there couldn't be like lightsaber fights, but I do
But you'd
think,
have to actually build up to them.
yeah.
It would be more of a slow burn.
Plus, I mean, the thing with like even like the movies and stuff, they technically didn't have that many in terms of like the prequels and the
Right, because
um,
like you have a brief facing off between Qui-Gon and Maul in the like midpoint of the Phantom Menace. Then of course you have the Duel of the Fates. Um, and then in Attack of the Clones you have a couple of times where
they pull
Anakin.
out. Okay, I'm not gonna count the scenes where they pull out the lightsabers because those don't really count as fights.
Right.
So like Geonosis mostly, like the whole segments there.
Yeah, the one where Django is kind of going at it with Obi-Wan.
Oh yeah, that's Camino, Geonosis, like the first war, Geonosis. Oh, Anakin infiltrate. Uh, I don't know if Anakin on Tatooine when he slaughters the Sand People counts.
Yeah, I wouldn't count that as a fight scene because the Sand People don't, at least in that scene, have much that can stand up against a lightsaber, and
Right.
probably a fight should involve some kind of mutual combat.
Yeah. A couple of Geonosis segments like Anakin. I guess I will say Attack of the Clones had a lot more considering.
Yeah, because
Um,
you've got the Obi-Wan and Anakin fight with Dooku, and of course you've got
Yoda
Mace
versus
Windu holding up Geonosis by saber point, and then of course you've got the oh shit, Master Yoda is here. We're about to see some awesome shit.
and the Colosseum fight with all the Jedi fighting.
Yeah, yeah.
And Revenge of the Sith was the open.
Mostly avoids saber fights for most of its run because you've got the Dooku Anakin fight right before Dooku gets beheaded.
I
You've
mean, to be
got
fair, with the prequel series, well, with the original trilogy, it was like a very classic, you know, classic mythic epic story.
yeah.
So
It like
even that still had very limited lightsaber action. To be fair,
Yeah.
Granted, that was also for like budgetary reasons and stuff, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
In the original trilogy, instead of the fall of Rome, it was depicted as kind of the fall of Camelot, and then in the prequel trilogy, it gets into sort of the fall of Rome aesthetic. But
Yeah.
for most of Revenge of the Sith, it's light on lightsaber fights, except for like at crucial points in the story.
Yeah.
So
Like
like,
the thing is, like, is like lightsaber fights are meant to be very impactful.
yeah, they're actually supposed to be a thing on which the plot pivots, which is why everyone remembers, and even people who don't like the Phantom Menace love the Duel of Fate scene because it literally is Maul and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan deciding kind of the fate of the galaxy, sort of.
Yeah. Um so yeah, like honestly, I think most of the show, like, for because it's 8 episodes, right?
Yeah.
I think up until maybe like the last 2 episodes, like in the version I'm thinking of, where it's mostly like courtly politics and discussions, and again, the whole chess match of who can outplay who in terms of like political manipulation and stuff like that.
I'd probably I'd probably reserve it for episode like having it at episode 5 I think does work. It's just that everything around the idea of episode 5 shat the bed. But yeah, I'd probably be at least a little bit more lenient with it and say about halfway through is when things start to
That's fair.
unravel.
That's fair. I'm just saying, like, again, not because after episode 5, a lot more lightsaber fights started to happen or something. In my
Mhm.
So again, it's just like restraint. I think is necessary, and that's like also a thing that's kind of been lacking lately.
Well, that and fucking write more than one draft of your story concept, please. Because they apparently have just stopped doing that altogether in modern Hollywood. And that's like Brainstormer and I have always noticed this whenever we do one of our brainstorming sessions. It seems like almost everything that goes wrong in modern day Hollywood could have literally usually been fixed by one or two minor changes in the final draft. And usually it takes us all of like 10 minutes to think of a much better and more organic way different story points can play out if we're going through things. And even we benefit from different drafts of things because we'll come up with a new concept and then figure out where it best fits in with the already established stuff. Or like in the case of our rewrite of Legend of Korra, we came up with a whole new setup process for our rewrite of Legend of Korra this time because for those that don't know, we about 3 years ago did a rewrite of Legend of Korra um, that was much better, but we had technical difficulties and the files we had on a lot of that stuff got lost, so we just decided to revisit Legend of Korra and see if we could like jog our memories. Not only did we jog our memories of most of the stuff we wanted to keep from the first rewrite process, we came up with a whole other thing. We actually filled in a lot of the gaps that we had in our rewrite of Legend of Korra. That honestly kind of makes our secondary draft even better than our first rewrite of Korra. But we won't go into that because we've already gone into that on several occasions on this show. Um, but yeah, even we benefit from occasional like redrafting of stuff. But apparently they just for all the writers they have in the writers' room, they apparently just don't like ever bounce off each other or brainstorm off each other ever anymore, or ever do like a second or third draft, which is like 90% of Hollywood's modern problem. They always like go with their first rough draft idea, and usually it ends up with a bunch of fucking Swiss cheese holes in the story they're trying to tell. which could have easily been solved if they had just taken an extra 5 minutes to think things through. Moving on.
Yep. But yeah. Plus, I mean, also with like, it would be Sorry. Like final thing before we move on.
Mhm.
I think the idea, general idea I've pitched for the Acolyte. Granted, I haven't gone in full depth, obviously, because it's more top of my head right now.
Mm.
But making it like a very like courtly politics, more so like cerebral, not cerebral show. I wouldn't say that. More along the lines of like maybe like the West Wing.
Yeah, like political maneuvering and stuff.
Yeah.
And you can still have the assassin plot line in a show like that. Like that is one part of that idea that could still work in this. As with the basic gist of the Cult of the Thread, and their thing, a lot of what like was loosely implied to be the case with the Cult of the Thread works better than what actually is shown in the show. And again, you can do a new Star Wars faction and have it actually make some kind of sense. It doesn't
Okay,
always
so
have
I
to be entirely derivative, but you actually have to
hold on.
put in the work of world building it.
And to explain why it's never mentioned in like the other, in like the movies or things before, it could make mention like if this would be like maybe, okay, for maybe 5 seasons, if we're going like roughly standard TV,
Hmm.
or maybe 3 if we're going like streaming, because usually it's 3 or 4.
Yeah, that just yeah. But okay.
Um, I mean the Jedi, like the old Jedi Order, would destroy various other like Force factions that never aligned with
And
the.
it was sort of implied even in the Acolyte that the Cult of the Thread was relatively small and that they only occupied this one planet.
So either way, it's just like, again, potential is always there. It's just never
Yeah.
fully utilized often.
And yeah, and if we're kind of going off of your idea of them being sort of pseudo like very like Bene Gesserit inspired, I imagine that one of their skills, one of the things they would specialize in and they would prioritize is stealth, is making sure that they're not detected because they know that, the more overtly the more of a nuisance you make of yourself, the more attention you're eventually going to draw. And I even sort of could be persuaded to like the idea that um that Plagueis um was inspired by the Cult of the Thread to make Anakin. You can also do that in the like Immaculate Conception of the Twins thing. If you actually make the Cult of the Thread an actual substantive like faction, and you actually explain how their powers work, and you make it at least as badass as the magical Ichor of Dathomir method is, then it isn't quite as insulting to the canon or to Plagueis or to, you know, the prophecy that it is the Cult of the Thread. And if you, kept if you actually did what the basic premise of the Cult of the Thread was implying and make them kind of view the Force not as a force but as a like web of interconnected and interwoven threads of fate, it would actually make sense even if like they were the ones who did the original prophecy, maybe. Like that would make kind of sense. And
Yeah,
so
like a mixture of soothsayers and political advisors.
yeah, similar to like the Oracle of Delphi, where they can they interact with the Force as a thread, so they can see where the connections are leading and so forth.
And if you're like make them like legit witches, how about actually base them off like legit witchcraft?
And this would also, of course, be helpful. And they do kind of borrow a lot from with the Night Sisters in particular. They borrow a lot from New Orleans voodoo and or
That makes sense.
Romani magic, i.e., quote unquote gypsy magic.
Okay.
That's kind of the vibe that it's kind of
Really?
the vibe that the Night Sisters and the Witches of Dathomir in general have.
Right. With
If you,
hold on.
Sorry.
Sorry. Okay. I don't know why, but one thing I have seen the scene, that's been memed, with their magic.
Power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
Wouldn't it make more sense if it was like in the style of the old rituals of like dancing around a bonfire?
Yes, it would.
Is what is that magic called, by the way, or like that form of magic called?
If you mean like magic that involves like dancing and like altered states of consciousness and stuff, that's usually referred to as ecstatic magic, because you're or sometimes Dionysian magic, because in the ancient Greek conception, which if I had my druthers, that's who I would base, or what I would base the Cult of the Thread on, is ancient Greco-Roman magic, because there's quite a lot of stuff there that could be useful for this thread concept. But anyway, so in ancient Greece, there were two sort of gods of theater or performance. There was Apollo, who was the sort of god of reason and the arts, and then there was Dionysus, who, apart from being a god of wine and partying, which he was also referred to sometimes as a god of poetic madness, because the idea was that um, that madness and genius were linked. So in order to become a vessel for the will of the gods, you kind of had to, in some sense, lose your grip on sanity a lot of the time. And if we're going with kind of a Oracle of Delphi style oracle structure for the Cult of the Thread, it would kind of make sense that they would go off that route, and that would actually again make the power of one, the power of two, the power of many. Which, by the way, there should have been a middle line in there that's the power of three, because like almost all the time in various forms of like shamanism or animism or witchcraft, 3 is a significant number. And again, if we're going off of like ancient Greek rules and ancient Greek structures for the basis of the Cult of the Thread, that leaves open the possibility of kind of magic at the crossroads and something equivalent to like Hecate worship almost, which if you were going to throw something from pre-established Star Wars canon in here to use for that, there's a character in the expanded universe that the mainline canon, now that Disney decanonized all the expanded universe, doesn't use anymore. Her name is Aboleth. She was at one point a ordinary human character, but according to the old EU canon, which I would bring back for this, the father of Mortis, the father of the family of Mortis, fell in love with her, and she bathed in this Force Nexus well that turned her into a creature similar to the son and daughter and father of Mortis. except she became corrupted by darkness, as you do, and so she kind of sort of became an almost eldritch creature. And in the EU canon, some of EU canon Luke's biggest battles were actually fighting her, and she is sort of an explanation as to why the sun got corrupted by the dark side to begin with. The implication there is that he takes after his mother, and that Aboleth is kind of sort of both an avatar of the dark side in general, yes, but also is sort of a witch goddess to the EU canon, which you could have easily pulled in here and it would have made sense. Stick Aboleth where Hecate would normally be in the Greek structure of witchcraft. And this also, speaking of making proper use of the thread, we've already seen in the episode of Clone Wars where Mother Talzin tortures Dooku with a voodoo doll type thing using some kind of sympathetic magic system. We've already seen that work. We've already seen that happen in the EU canon. So if the Cult of the Thread specializes in specifically sympathetic magic between, literally tying things together with the thread, that would make sense. And it would also allow you to exposit the ways that the thread use magic differently from the Sisters of Dathomir, for example. Because while Mother Talzin was almost able to kill Dooku with her little voodoo doll sympathetic magic thing, it was sort of kind of one of the weaker powers that she had when she did it. So you could say that maybe the Night Sisters don't know quite as much about how to do sympathetic magic as the Cult of the Thread does. They could like specialize in that. Sorry.
No, I get
You
it. I
you
opened the
asked me.
door here.
Yeah, you asked me to exposit about magic shit, and you you knew what was in this box. Don't come at me for opening it.
I opened the door. I realized that. I just, I am sure you want to get to the other articles though, and I don't want to.
Yes.
Yeah.
We still have things to do, and we also have the trailers to do. Although we might end up having to move one of them to next week just for time's sake.
Yeah, probably. Because I feel like you do want to get through the articles here.
Yeah. Sorry. My brain just started like making parallels between ancient Greek magic and ways you could implement it in the Star Wars universe, and it clicked. So
Yeah.
Exposition.
All right. So this is from Bounty in the Comics. Concord dev writes off critics. Why would I care about a bunch of talentless freaks hating on it? It's written by Spencer Bakuli. And then if I say name wrong again, I'm sorry. I'm terrible with names.
He sucks with the naming things, folks.
Okay, again, you can't deny that when a name is written, it looks like it's how it's spelled. You automatically have a different way it's said in your head, and then when it's said,
Yeah,
you think
then your brain goes, oh, I see how that works now. Okay.
Yeah, it's like, okay, this was published August 23rd, 2024. So quick aside here, or for context, I had no idea Concord was a thing until I just started hearing like how
most people didn't, because it looked so like bland and shitty that nobody really paid attention to it until the usual entertainment journo suspects started defending it, and then it became a thing. But with regards to that title, Mr. Concord Dev, once again, you have this thing where I'm going to have to play the Uno reverse card. If you don't care about the quote-unquote talented or the quote-unquote untalented
hold on, let me reread it again. Why would I care about a bunch of talentless freaks hating on it?
Okay. and being that as it may, if you don't care about the alleged talentless freaks who are hating on it, why should those people care about the talentless freaks who made it in the first fucking place? Because that's the thing. If you had made a game that was actually good enough to get people on board with it, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The only reason you didn't is because a lot of a lot of production teams and production companies are hiring literal talentless freaks on their creative staff, quote unquote.
Right. Oh, okay. I saw a trailer for this. I thought it was a Star Wars thing.
Nope. It's just very, very generic and derivative.
Okay. So moving on, or
Yep, moving on.
okay, it's more than in a move that's sure to engender some goodwill for the widely panned hero shooter. Former Firewalk Studios dev who worked on Concord has written off the game's numerous critics as nothing more than talentless freaks. Okay, the fact that he's a former dev is somewhat telling.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. If you morally shame anyone who criticizes you, that is necessarily going to result in a less good or less profitable product than it would if you actually took their criticism on board. Again, going back to my restaurant analogy. Who do you think is more successful? The person who makes a bad product to begin with, but is at least receptive to the customer feedback from that, and actually learns how to straighten up and fly right eventually, or the egotistical asshat with his own spine up his ass, who is aristocratically pompous and tries to shame the customer into eating the slop they prepared in the first place. Because a chef who is at least willing to take what his customer base wants on board is more than likely going to wind up being successful than a chef who for the sake of this argument will say is a French chef, because Lord knows the French are known to be this kind of artistic intellectual asshole. But if a pompous, like, cordon bleu trained chef opens a restaurant and shames his clientele every time he makes something they don't like, are we really going to feel that bad for him when he ends up being unemployable and unemployed? The answer is, of course, no. Because generally what you want to do when people criticize you for something is at least try to understand where they're coming from, and therefore to improve your product so that you can actually please a larger percentage of people. It doesn't matter how many quote unquote artistic bona fides you think you have if literally everyone who sees the art you make says that's utterly shit and I'm not paying for it. Moving on.
This PR misstep for the widely embattled title came courtesy of one Xander Farrell, a now former Fireworks Studios member who worked on Concord as a view model animator. In other words, the animations undertaken by the player character's model when in first-person view. Okay. Admittedly, things started off innocently, though, with Farrell, who uses they/them pronouns, taking to their Twitter on August 23rd to congratulate the Concord team on the release of their title. It's Concord release day, beamed the animator, so insanely proud of the team and what we have accomplished. A labor of love like nothing else. been playing it so much since early access started a few days ago. I'm so excited for it to be available for everyone. Okay.
We'll see that there is at least part of the problem. One, the they them pronouns may not be a red flag, but it's at least a yellow one. Surely, it probably indicates a few things. Obviously, I have nothing against non-binary people. Obviously, I have nothing against trans people, but the politically activist set who tend to embrace things like they them pronouns tend to be indicative of a certain approach to art, the aforementioned art school hackery approach that I just spent the last article lambasting, tends to be something that's comorbid with this kind of gender dysphoria. But secondly, and more on actual substantive point, therein lies your problem. You made something that only the people who made it would want to play, and then you're surprised that there are fewer audience members who think the way you think. See, this is the thing. It's important to know where the line is between things that you like for reasons that are purely idiosyncratic to you, and things that are therefore going to appeal to a wider audience. No doubt there is some overlap between these two things, especially if you're talented or good at your job, or if you take the time, care, and energy to make something as good and appealing as possible, even in spite of your niche perspective. But if you make something that you and only you would ever want to play, don't be surprised when your player base is therefore very, very small. Because you need to be able to learn the difference between things that you like in the room while you're watching or while you're making it, and things that will actually have an appeal to a wider audience. Another good example of this in other formats is the difference between Thor Ragnarok, which quite a lot of people really, really enjoyed, and Thor Love and Thunder, which quite a lot of people really, really did not enjoy. Because in the case of Thor Ragnarok, Taika Waititi was working with someone who could kind of refine down his improv skills and therefore make something actually meaningful out of it. Versus Thor Love and Thunder, where Disney basically wrote Taika Waititi a blank check and said, well, clearly, obviously, you're the one who made Thor Ragnarok profitable, so you can do whatever you want. It's the same problem that befell Patty Jenkins when Wonder Woman 1 was successful and they gave her a blank check to do whatever she wanted in Wonder Woman 1984, or what happened to George Lucas in the prequel era, because in the original Star Wars trilogy, he had a team of people who kind of could filter out his more zany ideas and make sense of his actual good ideas. Well, when you give people carte blanche to make something that is good only for them, of course it's going to have less appeal than something that is made to be meritocratic first and foremost and appeals to their creator's ego only in the most surface level sense. And this is a lesson for all the creators out there. Your ego, your personal whims, your divine dictates are not the reason people like you. If people like you at all, it's usually in spite of your personal idiosyncrasies, not because of them. And the more you assume that your ego is what makes things you create good, the more likely you are to piss all over whatever makes you iconic in the first place. Looking at you, Neil Gaiman, for example.
All right, moving on.
Moving on.
All right, and I'm so honored to have had this be my first AAA game Was a huge learning experience, lots of struggles, but I'm glad to have gone through them. They added, time to go play. Unfortunately, from there, things took a sharp turn to disaster. In response to Farrell's post, Twitter user Preston55272266 attempted to offer the animator their genuine condolences for Concord's abysmal reception, telling them, I'm sorry, so sorry this has to be your first. I do not believe it is you or any of the other devs' fault that this game has performed so poorly. I can tell that a lot of effort was put into completing this game. It just came out at the wrong time and genre.
Well, see, this is another thing. Similar to the they them thing from earlier. The fact that it's their first like big blockbuster game isn't necessarily a bad thing, but in context actually does explain a few things. Similar to how I was saying with Michael Waldron in Multiverse of Madness. Even if he is someone with genuine talent, which I do believe Michael Waldron probably is someone with genuine talent, giving Michael Waldron the keys to a movie as big and as important and as complicated as Multiverse of Madness, with him being a very inexperienced writer, was probably a bad idea to begin with. There's a reason why it's always best to have new creators start small and then have them work their way up to bigger, more influential things when they've proved themselves. Because if you force someone into that big blockbuster role too early, they will fuck up just for the dint of lack of experience, and then everyone will blame them for said lack of experience. There's a reason why we have these rite of passage sort of things, where in movie making, for example, you start making like indie movies, usually like indie horror movies, and once you've demonstrated that you have that skill set down, then they'll start broadening um the jobs you get hired for. Like for example, James Wan had to make like what 10 majorly successful Conjuring movies before he was really allowed to spread his wings to something else like Aquaman. There's a good reason for that, because when you're just starting out, you kind of have to find your footing first before you're allowed to play with the big boys, not solely because you're inexperienced, although that's a factor, but because to expect you to operate on a blockbuster level right out of the gate is something that most people will fall short of, and nobody likes seeing something they love or something they put their heart and soul into crash and motherfucking burn because they were overly ambitious or didn't have a solid enough base of skills to begin with. It's not only because we want good blockbusters, but because it's actually, in a way, kind of protecting the inexperienced indie writers from the standards of blockbusters. Because if you make the kind of mistakes you can get away with in an indie horror movie in a major blockbuster, you are fucked. Because blockbusters operate at a higher scale, and therefore a higher standard of quality must be adhered to. Same thing with AAA video games. You can get away with some stuff in a phone game that took you 5 minutes to code that you probably couldn't get away with in Assassin's Creed 10 or whatever the fuck we're up to now. And the more,
Hold on.
yeah.
Also, hello, Giant Turtle. Good to see you. Yeah, I hope you catch up before we're done too. I don't think we're gonna be done for a little bit, to be fair.
Yeah. We've got at least one more Concord article after this, and then we got trailers. So, although I think it's probably best if we pick one of the trailers and save the other one for next week.
All right. Mm, more than 10. I'm going to be fully honest.
Okay, but
Assassin's Creed games.
yeah, but in any case, my point is that people are more lenient with a phone game like Candy Crush than they are with the AAA game like God of War or any of the Dark Souls games or Assassin's Creed. Because, much in the same way as with blockbuster movies, a larger scale, one, is usually more expensive, and therefore you need to get a more solid return on your investment. And two, larger scales with broader audiences are also more heavily scrutinized because they are larger scale and are expected to appeal to the largest possible audience they can get. I.e., you can get away with a lot more on with a found footage movie you made using your phone than you can with the most recent Marvel movie, for example. Doesn't mean no one can ever, rise to the ranks to become that good. In fact, most of the great blockbusters we ever get are a case of somebody who previously had only done like horror movies. And horror movies are a good example because for some reason, people who start their directorial debuts using horror are very good at adapting those skills to other mediums for some reason. Much less so in the inverse, usually, actually. It's actually kind of interesting how much of a good gauge for talent horror movies can be sometimes. Anyway, moving on.
All right. But rather than thanking them for their message, liking their post, or simply acknowledging their post in private, Farrell instead offered the now deleted reply, I don't really care. It was a huge labor from a lot of insanely talented people making an awesome game. Why would I care about a bunch of talentless freaks hating on it?
Uh,
I'm sure having fun playing it, the animator concluded. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
um, See, that spiteful, vindictive, dismissive attitude, that is the dead center heart of the fucking problem. If you treat everyone who criticizes you as your like moral inferiors, that is already a massively unadvisable set of circumstances. But if you then go on to add on top of that you don't really care, then I must ask the immortal question that all fans do eventually ask. If I don't care about this major blockbuster of yours, or yeah, if you don't care about this massive blockbuster of yours, why should we as the audience give a shit? Because a lot of modern day creators make this mistake all the fucking time. Their response to any given criticism would be I don't give a fuck or I don't care. To which the natural rejoinder, of course, is if you don't care, why should we as the audience care? Which, by the way, is the correct answer to this question. Because generally speaking, it's better for you to give the impression that you do care, not just about the original project, but your about your audience's reaction to it, than the other way around. Because if you demonstrate that you don't care enough to make something worth seeing or playing or watching, then your audience will then react to that by not seeing or playing or watching it. Ask the Acolyte, ask Rings of Power, ask Velma, ask the Marvels, etc., and so on ad nauseum. Because there are far too many examples of this in the modern day. Moving on.
All right, okay. Give me one sec. Okay, let's check the comments. Okay, we're good. To further compound matters for the Concord team, despite Farrell's assertion, it seems the game absolutely needs the interest of some of those talentless freaks in order to survive. At current, per info provided by Steam analytics outlet SteamDB. For the record, this was in August, so
Yeah, it's almost as though you should care about the things you make, and if you demonstrate that you don't, or more than that, if you demonstrate that you hate your own audience, it will bite you in the ass eventually. Because people are only gonna be so charitable for so long. And if you actively spite them, that period of charitability is going to shrink like a motherfucker. Moving on.
all right. To further compound, already read that. The game has only managed to draw in a peak player count of just 679 in the roughly 24 hours since its release.
Oh my fucking god, that is terrible.
To that end, for anyone masochistic enough to want to endure a game whose gameplay and writing are both outdated. I was just finishing the last sentence here.
I will go image until my power comes back on, so that my face is actually visible and not red, because it looked a little bit red there to me when the power went out.
To that end, for anyone masochistic enough, also new icon by the way.
You said that the last time I went I went image, and I haven't updated it since that last time.
Oh, sorry, I must have forgotten. To that end, for anyone masochistic enough to want endure a game whose gameplay and writing are both outdated by about a decade, Concord is now available on the PlayStation 5 and PC platforms.
Well, see, that's the thing. Even the mainstream media is finally giving up on the lie here. You made something that was boring as shit. You alienated or actively shunned your audience, and the natural consequence of that is no one except you and people very close to you showed up. This is again the difference between George Lucas in the original trilogy and George Lucas in the prequel era. You need the people who will hold you to some kind of universal standard and not just lavish your idiosyncrasies. You need to make sure that whatever you make actually is appealing enough that it isn't just appealing to you and your friends. Because you can do that if it's something privately that you don't actually need financial profitability for. Like if you're drawing among you and your friends and no one is ever going to see those drawings, then you can be more indulgent. But if you actually need people to show up and like you in order for this thing to do well, you best make sure it's as universally appealing as you can get. Moving on.
Right. So this was originally from PCGamer.com, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's .com. The eagerness to grave dance on unpopular games has become a bad habit. Written by Tyler Wilde, published. I'm not too sure because this is an old archive version, but it says published 13 hours ago. I'm not, again, it's,
yeah. Responding to that premise, just right out the gate here. No, it really isn't. If you don't want people to dance on the grave of unpopular games, then make some games that would be popular. I.e., if you want people to like your thing, it is very helpful if you make something they can like. If you want to be successful in the medium of appealing to an audience, make something the audience would find appealing, rather than morally shunning and shaming the people who are pointing out when you fail to do so. Because again, the healthy approach to criticism is especially when a piece of criticism is almost universal or widely prevalent, you need to have the self-awareness to self-assess and go, hang on, let me remove my personal goggles and ask myself the question, did I fuck up? Because instead of doing that, instead of having the humility to ask yourself, wait a minute here, did I fuck up? You instead go, nah, everyone who disagrees with me is just subhuman and immoral and they shouldn't disagree with me. Derp. That's not healthy. That is the opinion of a narcissist who refuses to self-reflect. Moving on. Also, yay, my power is back on. So things have been restored.
Concord's low turnout has led to the usual jubilation over the prospect of seeing a big game fail.
It's not just the fact that it's not just that the game is big that makes people want to see it fail. It's that it is both big and bad or shit. It's not big games people like to see fail. It's big games who are a waste of money and or actively spite their fan bases that people like to see fail. When you go out of your way to tell your audience to go fuck itself, or to leave, or to not play my game, or not watch, then we won't show up then. Some of the time, especially if you're dealing with something that people already have an established love of, you can get people sticking around and being angry for a little while, but eventually you're going to run out of goodwill to burn. And once you run out of goodwill to burn, people will just leave or make some kind of replacement IP for the IP that you ruined. And rather than being mad at them for being angry with you, maybe you should have created something that they couldn't get angry at or wouldn't get angry at. And it helps to view your audience as valid, moral human beings if you're going to do that. Because shunning and shaming them and treating them like fascists and Nazis, not really all that effective. And probably just going to exacerbate the problem. Moving on.
Alright, Sony hero shooter Concord launched late last week, and its Steam concurrence, or well, last week relative to this
article, yeah.
Yeah. And its Steam concurrents haven't yet topped 1,000. A dramatically low turnout has already earned it the title of the biggest flop of the year on social media. And if you caught any of the discussion on Reddit, TikTok, and other platforms over the weekend, you also saw people gloating, posting screenshots of SteamDB concurrency charts and tacking on a generic dunk or claiming it rules, that we can all see a big game fail.
Again, it's not the fact that the game is big, it's that it's big and bad. Empty. Sorry.
No, I was going to say big and empty.
Yeah, well, not even necessarily empty, because usually when something is empty, it just winds up being kind of generic. But kind of generic things are successful all the time. It has to like dip lower than just merely generically bad in order for people to actually have glee for it. Usually, one good way to get that level of bad is when the people creating it deliberately try to subvert the idea of merit in the game, or if they shame and shun their alleged customer base. That's a good way to get people rooting against you. If you tell them they're all subhuman monsters for disagreeing with you or for not buying what you're selling them, then yeah, you're gonna get a certain percentage of those people who are gonna be very, very happy and experiencing Schadenfreude when you inevitably fail by your own merits. It's this thing where people like seeing people get their just desserts, and so when someone has gone out of their way to sabotage themselves, there's kind of a karmic glee that people have when someone who very obviously shot themselves in the foot now has to deal with the consequences of having done so. Moving on.
All right. The jubilation over Concord's low turnout, it apparently cracked the top 50 bestsellers on the PS Store over the weekend, derives to some degree from an I told you so sense of justice. The idea that out of touch, creatively bankrupt executives are cynically chasing trends, and that the rest of us would have had the common sense to avoid releasing a Concord, a Marvel's Avengers, a Suicide Squad, a Gotham Knights, or that perplexing Gollum game. But that's not actually that easy to know why one game succeeds and another doesn't.
That is mostly correct. My only addition or criticism or amendment of that would be it's not just the executives that are the problem. It's out of touch, ideologically driven creatives. Because funnily enough, it's not usually the money men that are out of touch with what their customer base wants. Because the money men want this thing called money. And so in order to gain said money, they at least try, at least a lot of the time, to have some kind of finger on the pulse of what their audience wants. Granted, they don't always get it right, and sometimes they pander too hard to the lowest common denominator. But at least as often as the money man get in the way of something being pandering and derivative, it's just as often, and frankly in this day and age more likely, that it will be some art house, art school mentality that the creatives learned in art school that gets in people's way. It's people being out of touch, ideologically driven activists instead of just creatives that tends to bite people in the ass. Because I can already tell what this person is going to want to do. They're going to want to blame corporatism or capitalism for this trend. And it's not, as much as I despise corporatism, you can't really put all of this at the feet of corporatism. A large percentage of the reason why all forms of entertainment fail in this day and age, not just video games, but a large percentage of why all forms of entertainment are failing lately is because people learn this neo-Hegelian, Antonio Gramsci-esque ideology where art is a means to a socio-political or moral end that is biting them in the ass. The mentality that says meritocracy isn't real, or that it's harmful, childish delusion we have to disabuse people of, or only the media illiterate give a shit about things like lore, IP, character, or canon consistency. It's that attitude that usually winds up shooting modern games in the foot. Way more so than corporate greed. Corporate greed is and always has been bad, but very ironically indeed, usually in this day and age, it's the corporate greed bastards who actually want to make money who end up saving a lot of games from this kind of meddling, or movies, or books, or whatever. Moving on.
Right. Devs at Fireworks Studios, many of whom are ex-Bungie, made a game in the genre they have experience in and released it without the free-to-play monetization we so often complain about, which isn't a cynical or underhand thing to do. But concurrency numbers have, in some situations, acquired a moral quality. If you release an unpopular game, everyone is suddenly morally justified to shame and embarrass you, whether it's because all big-budget games are bad, or live service games are bad, or you did too much woke, pick one.
Usually it's some combination of all three. And yes, they are in fact entirely justified. Because back in the day, in the far gone days of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, people understood this thing where the happier you can make your customers in general, the more on side you can make your customers feel in general, the more likely they are to support you. That's why things um like the console wars between Nintendo and Sega first, and then Xbox and PlayStation second, or the cola wars of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s between Coke and Pepsi, or it, the computer wars between the 90s and early 2000s between Microsoft and Apple. That's um, why those sorts of marketing schemes worked, because they actually made their audience proud to be a part of a team, whether that team was Dunkin' Donuts versus Starbucks, or whether that team was Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, or whether that team was Nintendo versus Sega, or whether that team was, probably most relevant to this, PlayStation versus Xbox. By making your audience happy and giving them products that they can hang their hats on, metaphorically speaking, you made them want to positively affiliate with the brand, and in so doing, made a loyal customer out of the people who identified with the brand. In modern marketing, this rule seems to have been almost completely inverted, to the point now where you are actually seen as being too stupid or too childish if you actually give a shit about pre-established IPs or brand loyalty, or the good old days when companies actually wanted to give their audience something they could actually willingly choose to buy. Now, if you care about things like in-universe logic of pre-established IP, you are seen as a dangerous, moronic, and possibly even fascist child, and you have to be deprogrammed of that impulse somehow. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the second the marketing smart money went from we should make our customers happy to affiliate with our brand to our users are all morally inferior fuckwits and possible fascists. The second you made that switch in rhetoric, all these companies spiraled downhill, because far be it from me to side with you know the PR and propaganda ministers of the 80s and 90s, but the make your audience happy and then they'll be loyal to you method makes so much more sense than the be the moral superiors of your audience, or the socio-political superiors of your audience, ever does, did, or will. It's not surprising that ever since that changeover happened, everything has started crashing and burning. Because, you actually should have some loyalty to the people who are lining your fucking pockets and putting food on your table. Radical idea, I know. Moving on.
Yeah. My guess that the real reason for all this grave dancing is that it feels like a victory over FOMO. If the new $40 game sucks and no one is playing it, I can safely go back to whatever I was playing before without worrying that anyone's having fun without me. Beating up on unpopular games is also a way to passively farm a satisfying sense of vindication. If I never paid attention to a game that fails at launch, it affirms the correctness of my judgment and the immaculacy of my taste without any effort on my part.
The word you were looking for, or probably were looking for, was immaculateness. Immaculacy is not in common parlance. And I'm guessing you only changed that particular piece of phrasing because you thought immaculacy sounded smarter. Well, speaking as somebody who is well known for using the occasional $4 words, if you can't do it right, don't do it at all. Which, I mean, could just as easily be the subheader of this entire conversation. If you can't be arsed to make something people want to buy, maybe you shouldn't have made anything in the first place. And again, it's not simply a fear of missing out situation. There simply is not anything to miss out on, according to most people. Again, it's not that big games fail that makes people happy. It's big games that intentionally spited the audience failing that makes people happy. I.e., when the creative behind the newest movie or book or comic or video game go out of their way to say, we're making this piece of art an ideological weapon and that's a good thing, and anyone who disagrees with us is just media illiterate or fascist. When people do that, it's when people start rooting against them. Again, as bad as corporate greed might be, back in the day when the corporate greedy bastards were in charge of getting the audience on board, they at least maintained some standard of, if we make the audience happy, they will like us, and that will translate into loyalty, not to mention a ravenous desire to consume our product, which we want because that makes us more money and makes our brand healthier. That was a much more sensible way of doing things, even if it did occasionally backfire and lead to pandering to the lowest common denominator, because a lot of the people behind these decisions didn't actually consume the media they make. Even though that did sometimes happen, its batting average was much, much higher than the current batting average of be the moral and socio-political superiors of your audience and shun and shame them whenever they don't toe the line or uncritically accept your framework. Moving on.
When a struggling game has a high enough profile, as Concord does, the reasonable impulse to crack a joke about its Steam concurrence gives way to that sort of thinking, which then gives way to a shit-talking free-for-all that turns the developers into cartoonish corporate stooges and totally warps the reality of the game. Battlefield 2044 became one of these dog piles back when it launched. And to make their point, its detractors started copying and pasting a giant list of features from previous Battlefield games that DICE was accused of removing, including features I don't remember anyone liking in the first place. I never saw anyone use Battlefield 1's fortification building system, but it became a must-have feature as soon as it couldn't be used as a bludgeon.
Okay, again, you are at least semi-aware of what is happening to some degree, but your argument is functioning as a straw man because you're hyperfixating on the corporate greed aspect and not the ideological art house twattery aspect. It doesn't matter who is footing the bill for this shit, i.e., it doesn't matter how corporate something is, if it's operating on a warped non sequitur ideology about how art works. Again, you may rightfully criticize as many things about corporations as you feel like, but if you ignore the creative bankruptcy here, if you ignore the nonsense of the neo-Hegelian Gramsciite Frankfurt School approach to art, that art is only ever valuable as a means to an end and never as an end in itself, if you ignore the prevailingness of that ideology, you will only ever be seeing the smallest percentage of the existing problem. Because, again, at least back in the day when the corporate stooges were in charge, the worst thing they were ever guilty of was occasionally misunderstanding or belittling their audience's intelligence and pandering to them too hard. But if only we knew how good we had it, because in the modern day and age, you you can't even convince the current crop of creatives to pander. Like, it was the worst thing about when the corporations were in charge, but it's literally the best case scenario with anything modern day creatives make, because they have, like, gone so anti-corporate and so anti-fandom to such a degree that they actually consider giving your audience what they want to be a moral wrong. And nothing that is born out of that giving my audience what they want is a moral and socio-political wrong is ever going to be good long term. You might have enough people with enough talent to maybe sell some people on some subversion that they honestly probably get to more so in spite of themselves rather than because of themselves. You might have the occasional Neil Gaiman or Alan Moore or Grant Morrison in there who can actually make a convincing pitch for the subversion. But for every one out of a million Alan Moores, or every one out of a million Neil Gaimans, or every one out of a million Grant Morrisons, you're going to get 1,000 people who have no more talent than the average Annie Sarkeesian. And as a result, you will show just how surface level and overly pedantic and artistically pathetic subvert everything and piss off my audience really is as a philosophical linchpin. Moving on.
I don't think the mistake DICE made with Battlefield 2044 was not making a list of every discrete feature that's ever been in a Battlefield game and then putting them all into one game. But through the warped lens of Reddit and other platforms, that's what the conversation became.
Here's sorry.
I just gotta be honest. I think after this we are gonna call it, just because I am starting to feel like I don't know why the exhaustion or something is getting to me.
Okay, yeah, we'll finish this article and then we'll call it, because I guess we'll move some of the stuff we were gonna do to next week. But before we get back into it, I was just gonna point this out. Just because it's not a lens that you share doesn't mean it's wrong, and certainly doesn't mean it's warped. Your mistake here, sir, is ignoring half of the conversation, actually more than half of the conversation, because you can only see the corporate failures of this current way of thinking, and yet you don't lay any of this blame at the feet of the creatives responsible for it, or the art school ideology that has become basically common practice among every creative industry now. And if you can't see or refuse to acknowledge any of those problems in any legitimate way, you will never even end up speaking with half of the fan base. Because if your only criticism of modern day gaming is corporatism and capitalism are bad, MK, then you're going to have to miss me with all of that shit, because for as bad as corporatism and capitalism can occasionally be, it's nowhere near as bad as the art is only ever a means to an end and we should go out of our way to spite our fan base because our fan base are a bunch of childish, dangerous fascists approach. And if you refuse to acknowledge that problem, then you're missing the lion's share of the problem, because that is in fact the main problem of modern day writing or modern day creativity in general. It's not the corporate stooges that are behind all this nonsense. It's the ideologically possessed art school hacks. Moving on.
Right, okay. Concord's Steam launch numbers are astonishingly low for a blockbuster competitive game, but the piranha-like gnashing of social media hasn't delivered any real insight into why it's fared so poorly. Some onlookers have said with conviction that Concord's $40 price tag was obviously one of the problems, forgetting that Helldivers 2, the biggest breakout game of the year and a game also published by Sony, is $40. In a saturated market where 39 games release on Steam each day on average, I'm not convinced that price was a problem. Concord couldn't even get a large audience to give it a shot during its free beta.
Okay, fair enough. That is objectively correct. The price tag wouldn't have been an issue if people genuinely thought it was worth the money. Helldivers is an excellent example, which leads us back to my rejoinder from earlier. If you want people to buy a thing, perhaps maybe make something that they would actually want to buy, not just be willing to buy, mind you, but would actually desire to buy. That would be helpful, because being like passively apathetically okay with buying something is one thing. If you really want to make people be on your side, if you really want to endear people to you, you have to make something that people not only would just passively choose to buy, but would be happy to buy, which again is the difference between today's day and age and yesterday's day and age. Moving on.
Alright. I don't have the one true answer. But my take for now is that Concord isn't selling a fantasy or a narrative that's getting FPS players excited to play it in the first place. Before they've even decided whether they like its guns, characters, and modes. And one reason I can imagine it's struggling in that respect is that it doesn't have an easily decimated identity rooted in competitive shooter pedigree as its competitors do. Valorant is Nove Nouveau, Counter Strike. It's easy to tell your Discord friend it's CS:GO, but by the League of Legends studio. Apex Legends came from Infinity Ward lineage. Deadlock is Dota plus TF2. Concord comes from ex-Bungie devs, but I don't get the impression that Destiny 2 fans perceive it as an offering with any deep spiritual connection to their beloved space fashion game. Bungie also did Halo, so
The word you were looking for, by the way, is nouveau.
Nouveau. Okay.
It's an artsy-fartsy art house word, which again, I suspect that maybe the reason this person either doesn't want to or is unable of actually addressing the artistic issues at play here might be because he is one of said art school hacks.
Okay.
Because even I don't use the word nouveau very often, and I would sort of question the hipstery the hipsteriness of anyone who did,
Right.
except that in very
Okay.
specific contexts.
But I don't get the impression that Destiny 2 fans perceive it as an offering with any deep spiritual connection to their beloved space fashion game, of which the PvP Crucible is a small part. Okay.
And again, there is at least some argument there. If you want people to play your game, you have to make a game that people not just would be okay with buying, but would actually willingly be excited about. Because that's also the mistake a lot of people make. It's not usually enough to make something that people would just apathetically consume. A lot of people will apathetically consume stuff, But the best case scenario is to make something that gets people actively excited as much as possible. Because if you can get the core of people who are willing to get excited about something, if you're willing to get them excited, they will drag all the filthy casuals along with them. But if you only make something for the filthy casuals, a lot of the hardcores would just ignore it, and they won't even tell the filthy casuals about a thing they're ignoring. Moving on.
All right, dramatic post-launch turnarounds do happen, and maybe updates and a sale can get Concord some momentum. Or maybe there just isn't enough oxygen available to a game with Concord's particular characteristics in late August 2024, a period that included one of the fastest selling games ever on Steam, a World of Warcraft expansion, great new games like Tactical Breach Wizards. I actually want to check out. Okay, that sounds interesting.
Tactical Breach Wizards. That does, in fact, sound interesting.
And now Valve's own hero-based MOBA shooter hybrid. DICE went on years-long Battlefield 2 overhaul campaign after its rough launch. It's possible Firewalk will stick with it. Either way, the reflex cheer for Concord's failure as if it's deserved only produces resentment and misunderstandings, creating an environment where everything is deemed obvious and real analysis is drowned out in favor of shareable quips, surface level observations, and hyperbole.
Hyperbole.
What he said. That these are not the ugliest character designs you've ever seen. Reddit, get it, grip.
Right, but okay, here's the thing. And again, just because you disagree with an argument does not make it wrong or untrue. Or just because you think something is being exaggerated doesn't mean the thing that is at the heart of the exaggeration is not at least arguable. And by the way, the more you demonize and grandstand over people you don't like, the more hardened their dislike of you and yours will get. Remember what I was saying earlier about only the most artsy of all hipsters uses the word nouveau unironically in a non high art setting? That's the thing. You appear, for all the world, sir, to be one of those art school hacks that I was referring to earlier, or perhaps something even worse. You might be one of the people who aspires to be one of those art school hacks but hasn't made it yet, which is even worse than that, because at least the art school hacks who have made it have at least succeeded in their particular field of interest. But you appear to be the kind of art school hack who isn't artsy enough by those standards to get off of the journalist treadmill. And as long as you are pretending that there are no artistic reasons to dislike things, that it's only ever my capitalism or my corporate greed, the more you will be forever flabbergasted by people who you disagree with still having the power to prove to you that you are wrong. Moving on.
Right. Okay. You can understand why this is a more comfortable rhetorical lane than reckoning with the more complex reality of a volatile gaming landscape, where quality is not the sole predictor of success, where multi-billion-dollar institutions like Sony now often struggle to be heard, where it's difficult to make predictions, and where it often feels like years of work can be swept away by small miscalculations and rapid changes in taste.
But see here's once again the thing. No, you just strawmanned your entire opposition there. No one is saying that quality is, was, or ever will be the only factor. But pretending like quality doesn't matter, or quality isn't at least a significant determiner of such things, is exactly where you and your art school hack buddies are going wrong. Because you guys seem to believe, based on the influence of neo-Hegelianism and or the Frankfurt School, that meritocracy is a cultural or social delusion that only exists within the like purview of consensus. And that is not true. Not only is that not true, that is not how people on the ground who haven't gone through 4 years of Antonio Gramsci for morons actually think. Whether you think meritocracy is a delusion or not, you are not going to be able to convince people of that assumption. Most people are going to insinuate, by whatever criteria they have, that their main reason for not buying a thing is either that they've never heard of a thing, which is down to the marketing's fault, or that they didn't think said thing looked or was all that good. And acting like that second thing does not exist or doesn't meaningfully exist because cultural consensus at the bottom of all things, derp, makes you a moron. If you don't accept that some people's intersubjective agreement on something being good or bad has anything to do with the actual qualities of a thing, then you are an art house moron and you will never fully understand why people do things. Because most people on the ground actually do, by whatever criteria they are using, give a damn about quality. Some people have different criteria for quality, some people like different things, but the intersubjective or objective criteria that underpins some of those decisions does meaningfully exist and isn't just cultural consensus derp. Because if that were true, there would never be an example of something being successful across cultures. And
No.
speaking as an anime fan who's been an anime fan since his early childhood, that is very obviously not the case because anime became successful in the Western world. A lot of South Korean content becomes successful in the Western world, and a lot of older stuff from the Western world becomes successful in Japan or in South Korea, where it's entirely cut off from any sort of cultural consensus. And your ideology cannot explain that phenomena, where people from a completely different cultural context can still agree that quality is found in that thing. Whereas people who believe in quality can very easily explain how that works because they believe in quality. So it's really not that much of a mystery if you get out of this everything that looks like meritocracy is actually just cultural consensus mindset. Moving on. And at that point, yeah, we probably should call it.
So with that, folks, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, avidazai, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
Shalom and fuck off.